The wind rattles the broken shutters. The sand hisses against the walls. Sit close, because once you step into the wasteland, there is no coming back whole. These are the most disturbing true survival tales from the places the world forgot, told by those who should not have lived to speak. Listen, if you dare. The heat had a way of crushing the air until every breath felt like swallowing fire. The horizon was a blur, road and sky melting into one another in a shimmering haze that made me question if we were moving at all. The convoy stretched ahead of me in a thin line of dust and steel, each truck carrying crates of grain and water for people I had never met, for a settlement no one in the line had ever seen. We were ghosts moving through an endless graveyard of sand, trusting the compass more than our own eyes. The sun punished us until the metal skins of our trucks burned to the touch. I drove with rags wrapped around my hands, the wheel vibrating like it was alive, shuddering with the road's heat. The radio cracked with static, no voices, no music, just the desert whispering in frequencies too low for comfort. Men spoke less as the day wore on, eyes glazed, lips splitting, water rationed to sips that did little more than make the thirst sharper. By nightfall, the heat gave way to a strange chill. The sky turned black and full of stars, but they looked wrong, too sharp, as if the desert polished them into blades. We lit no lamps, trusting the pale glow of moonlight to guide us. That was when I saw it happen. One moment, the truck ahead of me rolled steady, its taillights glowing faintly red through the dust. The next, those lights blinked once, twice, and then were gone, snuffed out as if the desert had reached up and pinched them closed. No sound, no skid, no wreck, just absence, like it had never been there at all. The radio hissed louder then, not with static, but with something closer to breathing. We stopped the engines and let the desert silence swallow us. The only sound was the wind scraping across the dunes, carrying the taste of dust. Flashlights flickered weakly in the dark as we spread out, searching for broken glass, twisted metal, anything that could prove the truck had been real. All we found were tire tracks that ran steady for several yards before they simply ended. Not veered off, not buried shallow, but stopped as if the wheels had lifted into the sky or sunk straight through the sand. The others cursed and muttered about mirages, but I knew what I had seen. The taillights had been there, pulsing through the dust, and then they were gone. I remembered the driver's laughter on the radio just an hour before, his voice crackling as he joked about how the desert was playing tricks on him. That laughter still echoed in my ears, cut short in a way that felt unfinished, as though the desert had stolen the punchline. We dug at the sand with our boots and hands, desperate for a clue. The wind fought us, pouring grit back into every hole we carved, burying our efforts before we could make sense of them. It was as if the earth itself refused to give up its secret. When one of the men finally unearthed a small piece of cloth, just a strip, torn and frayed. It felt colder than it should have, as though it had never belonged to the heat. He dropped it quickly, and the wind carried it away like ash. By the time we gave up and returned to the trucks, the night had deepened. The stars seemed sharper, closer, like they were watching. When we tried the radios again, the laughter was still there. Not ours, not his. Just the same laugh, looping faintly, trapped in the static, refusing to fade. By the second night, the desert had already claimed us in ways we did not speak of. Every man kept his eyes locked on the truck ahead, as if staring hard enough could anchor it in place. We drove in silence, radios off, no one daring to break the brittle thread of calm that hung between us. Still, dread was thick in the air, heavier than the dust that clung to our throats. It happened again, without warning. One moment the convoy was whole, headlights cutting steady lines through the dark. And then the second truck ahead of me blinked out. No crash, no screech, no plume of sand, just absence. A neat, impossible gap where a living, breathing man had been seconds earlier. The convoy slowed to a crawl, engines humming low like beasts refusing to move deeper into the dark. I could feel the vibration of my own truck beneath me shift, unsteady, as though even the machine knew what we did not say, that something was hunting us. The men behind me whispered through the radio, their voices brittle and breaking. Some prayed, some cursed, some begged to turn back, though we all knew there was no road behind us anymore, only sand erasing everything we left. I thought of the driver who had vanished the night before, his laughter trapped in the static. I realized I would never hear it again, not the way it had been. What echoed now belonged to the desert. The engines idled uneasily, knocking and rattling like they were gasping for breath. One of the headlights flickered. For a moment, I swore I saw something move across the dunes, long and low, a shadow too quick to follow. Panic spread through the line, sharp as broken glass. Even the trucks groaned, as though afraid of what was waiting to claim the next one. The horizon bent in ways it should not have. At first, I thought the wind was playing tricks, but the dunes began to shift with intention, sliding and reforming like great bodies moving beneath the sand. They circled us slowly, not with the randomness of weather, but with the patience of hunters closing in on prey. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles burned, trying not to blink, afraid the whole convoy would vanish if I looked away. That was when the radios came alive. We had left them quiet after the first two disappearances, but now they crackled back on by themselves. Not with laughter this time, but with whispers. Low, broken voices that carried our names. My name, repeated in a tone that sounded almost pleading, almost kind. The others shouted to turn the sets off, to rip out the wires, but it was no use. The voices only grew clearer, threading through the static like hands reaching from the dark. They told us to leave the road. The words came tangled and warped, but the meaning was unmistakable. Promises of safety, of water, of shade from the punishing sun. The directions were precise, urging us to steer away from the cracked pavement and into the shifting dunes. One of the drivers swore he saw lights ahead, a glowing settlement waiting for us. He jerked the wheel before anyone could stop him, and his truck veered into the sand. We never saw him again. Not his headlights, not the dust trail, nothing. The whispers celebrated then, rising into a chorus of voices layered over one another, as though they had been waiting for just one man to obey. My skin crawled as the sound filled the cab, pressing against my skull. Outside, the dunes seemed to lean closer, trembling like predators ready to strike. And I knew if we listened again, none of us would see another dawn. By dawn, the world was emptied. I woke with the wheel still locked in my hands, the desert stretched out in every direction, nothing ahead, nothing behind. The line of trucks that had once rattled and coughed across the sands was gone, erased as though they had never existed. The horizon was bare, and the silence pressed so heavy it felt like weight on my chest. I climbed out, stumbling into the pale light, hoping to see tracks, wreckage, some sign of where the others had gone. But the sand was smooth, unbroken, as though the night itself had swept a hand across the land and leveled it flat. No tires, no footprints, no shadow of the men I had spoken to, laughed with, bled beside. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling between dunes, but the sound grew louder, mechanical, grinding, unmistakable. Engines, dozens of them, roaring just beneath my feet. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the ground. What I heard made my blood freeze. The convoy was still moving, still driving, its gears shrieking in the dark earth below. The sound circled me, rising and falling like the pulse of something alive. I could make out horns blaring faintly, radios crackling with voices twisted and stretched until they no longer belonged to men. It was as if the desert had swallowed the trucks whole, dragging them under, but left their engines screaming forever in torment. I wanted to run, but wherever I stepped, the earth vibrated, the phantom convoy pacing me, hidden just below the surface. My knees sank deeper into the sand, and I swear I felt heat rising from beneath, the tremor of unseen wheels grinding past. And then a voice broke through the static, clear and close, whispering my name. It was the driver's laughter, again. Only this time, it was coming from under the ground, calling me to join them. The sun struck the land until it shone like a wound. What should have been desert sand had been melted into a sheet of black glass that stretched as far as I could see, a frozen tide gleaming with cruel light. I had heard stories of bombs that burned hotter than the sun, leaving behind nothing but silence and scars. Looking at the plains, I believed every one of them. Each step I took cracked faintly against the glass, but the echoes came back wrong. They did not match the rhythm of my own feet. When I stopped, the sound did not. It kept moving, a second set of footsteps walking a half-beat behind me, lighter, sharper, too precise to belong to wind. My reflection in the surface seemed stretched, bent, as though it leaned forward, eager to climb out. The air was still, suffocating, heavy with the stench of scorched stone that clung to the back of my throat. The horizon shimmered with heat, and shapes flickered within it. Figures I could not reach, always just out of sight, their shadows dragging across the glass like stains that would not fade. The further I walked, the louder the echoes grew, until it sounded as though dozens of people were following me, their steps closing in, tapping with frantic urgency. When I spun to face them, there was nothing. Only my own distorted reflection staring back from the black mirror below. Its eyes glinted wet, too alive, and for the first time, I realized the glass was not smooth. It bulged in places, rippled like something pressed against it from beneath, straining to break through. The silence that followed was worse than the echoes. I was no longer sure which footsteps were mine. You are now going to write this chapter. The Glass Plains, Chapter 2. By nightfall, I realized the reflections didn't match my movements. My shadow froze when I walked, lifted its arm when I did not. The stars above warped into faces pressed against the glass. Make it max 340 words long. Make sure every chapter will tie in well with the previous chapter so that the story will be smooth. Except Chapter 1, because that chapter is the beginning of a new story. Also always end Chapter 5, strong and terrifying. Do not include bullet points or chapter heads. Make sure to write in the same tone and writing style as example. I could not stand the weight of the echoes any longer. I sank to my knees, palms flat against the black glass, and pressed my face close enough to feel its strange warmth radiating back at me. At first, I thought it was only my reflection, warped and stretched by the uneven surface. But then the shapes shifted, and I saw them. Beneath the skin of the plains were people, countless bodies packed tight as though drowned beneath ice. Their faces were pale, distorted by the thickness, but their movements were unmistakable. Hands clawed upward, scraping at the barrier, leaving smears and cracks like fingernails digging at a coffin lid. Mouths opened and closed in voiceless agony, screams I could not hear but could feel shuddering in my bones. Their eyes were wide and frantic, and in them I recognized something far worse than despair. Recognition, as though they could see me kneeling above, watching, refusing to help. One face pressed directly beneath my palm, the glass warping outward with the force of its desperation. Its lips moved soundlessly, but I swore I knew the word. Help. The longer I stared, the more I realized how many there were. Not a dozen, not 100, but thousands, bodies stacked in shifting layers that seemed to sink deeper with every heartbeat. Some were fresh, faces that looked like they had been buried only yesterday. Others were twisted, blackened, their mouths locked open in eternal terror. The glass pulsed faintly beneath my hands, as if it were not solid at all, but some thin membrane straining to hold them down. For a breathless moment, I thought it would split and pour them onto me, a tide of dead hands dragging me under. I stumbled back, but the faces followed, pressing harder, waiting for the barrier to break. The first crack sounded like thunder rolling under my skin. I froze, heart hammering, as a pale fissure split the glass beneath me. It ran outward in jagged lines, branching like veins, each one glowing faintly with a sickly white light. My weight pressed the fractures deeper, and I heard something stir below, a low groan of shifting bodies. Then came the fingers, bone-white and brittle, yet strong. They pressed through the cracks, clawing blindly at the air. Shards of glass rained upward, slicing my hands and face, but still I couldn't move. The surface swelled as more of them pushed through, hands grasping, arms straining, desperate to break free. Their faces appeared next, pressing tight against the glass until the barrier splintered around their skulls. Their eyes were gone, hollow sockets rimmed with cracks, dripping with black liquid that spread like ink across the shining surface. But even without eyes, I felt them searching. Their heads turned toward me, noses flaring, mouths opening to breathe air they had been denied for too long. The ground groaned beneath me like something ancient waking from sleep. Each fracture spread in sharp, deliberate patterns, circling my body, isolating me on a shrinking island of unbroken glass. The sound of the cracks was deafening, a chorus of splitting bone. My reflection shattered into pieces, dozens of me staring back, each warped, each afraid. I scrambled backward, but the fingers followed, dragging themselves higher, their jagged nails scraping sparks as they clawed for purchase. One brushed against my ankle, cold as the grave, and I felt my muscles seize as if ice had entered my blood. I knew then they were not searching for escape. They were searching for me, only me. I fled across the shattering surface, every step sending new fractures screaming outward like lightning bolts trapped beneath my feet. The sound of glass breaking chased me, louder than my own heartbeat, louder than the ragged breaths tearing from my throat. The pale hands clawed higher, reaching for me as though the entire plane had become a graveyard rebelling against its silence. I did not look back. I couldn't. If I saw their eyeless faces one more time, I knew my legs would stop and I would never move again. The horizon finally rose, a jagged line of black rock where the endless sheet of glass surrendered to barren earth. I stumbled onto it, collapsing on my hands and knees, shards cutting deep but feeling merciful compared to the cold touch I had nearly surrendered to. Behind me, the glass plains groaned like a sea dragged back by its tide. Then silence, too complete, as though nothing had ever moved beneath that shining skin. I should have felt relief, but instead the fear followed me. Days later, in the safety of another camp, I caught sight of myself in a puddle after the rain. The water rippled, and for a breathless second, the reflection was not mine. It was theirs. The pale faces pressed against the surface, lips moving soundlessly, eyes hollow and reaching. I threw a rock into the puddle, shattering it. But when I turned to a window pane that night, they were waiting there too. Every surface that can hold a reflection has become a doorway for them. I see their fingers tapping faintly against mirrors, their sockets turning toward me in pools of water. They are patient. They are waiting. And I know one day I will slip. Not into the puddle, not into the mirror, but back through the glass, where their hands are still reaching for me. The town was nothing but husks of brick and splintered wood, the kind of place the wind howled through like it was hungry. Doors hung from rusted hinges, windows were black holes, and every step I took kicked up ash instead of dust. They said no one went there anymore, not since the last well had gone sour. But thirst has a way of dulling fear, of making a curse sound like superstition told by cowards. My tongue was split, my lips raw, and I would have drunk poison gladly if it promised to cool the fire in my throat. I found it in the center of the town square, a stone ring half buried in sand, its rope frayed but still attached to a bucket swaying faintly in the dead air. The wood smelled of mildew and something darker, as though the well itself had been left to rot. I stood there listening. No sound of water. Only an emptiness so deep it felt like it could swallow the sky. Still, I pulled the rope. The bucket groaned down into the dark, the sound of it echoing too long, as though the well stretched into the earth far deeper than stone should allow. I counted my breaths, each one shallow, weak. Then a splash, faint but real. My hands shook as I hauled it back up, muscles screaming. The bucket emerged, wet and dripping. The smell hit me first, iron and rot, thick enough to make my stomach lurch. The liquid sloshed heavy and black, not water, but something thicker, clinging to the wood. My reflection shivered in it, pale and warped, my eyes too wide. I told myself it didn't matter. I lifted it anyway because thirst doesn't care about curses. And when the first mouthful slid down my throat, it burned cold. Not relief. Possession. The bucket trembled in my hands, dripping black trails across the stone lip of the well. It looked less like water and more like something siphoned from a wound. Thick, sluggish, with a sheen that caught the light like oil. The stench was sharp, metallic, a stinging weight in my nostrils that made my eyes water. Every instinct told me to drop it, to let it slide back into the depths where it belonged. But my mouth was fire. My tongue cracked like dry earth. I had no choice. The first swallow was bitter and cold. So cold it stabbed straight through my chest and settled into my stomach like a fist of ice. The taste of iron coated my teeth, grinding against them as though I had bitten into rust. I gagged, but I forced more down, desperate enough to trade sanity for relief. Each gulp slid thicker than the last, and I could feel it clinging to the walls of my throat, refusing to leave. When I finally dropped the bucket, my lips were stained black, my hands trembling uncontrollably. For a moment, nothing changed. The burn in my throat was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that stretched down into my gut. Then came the heartbeat. Not mine, but something slower, heavier, pulsing in the pit of me as though the well itself had poured its rhythm into my veins. I staggered back, clutching my chest. But the sound only grew louder. The buildings around the square seemed to bend with each throb, timbers groaning in time with a pulse. My vision swam, and in the corners of my eyes, I swore I saw movement in the empty doorways, shapes that hadn't been there before. The thirst was gone, but in its place was something far worse, something that had followed me up from the dark. Night fell heavy, and I curled in the ruins of an abandoned house, the boards creaking with every breath of wind that slipped through its broken walls. My stomach had begun to turn long before the sun died, but in the dark it grew worse. It wasn't hunger, not even pain. It was motion. A slow writhing beneath my ribs, twisting in steady waves as though something inside me had begun to swim. I pressed my hands against my belly and felt it shift, a ripple traveling under my skin. Panic clawed through me. I tried to breathe steady to convince myself it was sickness, nothing more. But then the convulsions rose sharp and sudden, and I lurched forward, my throat burning as bile surged upward. What came out wasn't bile. It was the water, black and thick as before, splattering against the rotted wood of the floorboards. It reeked of iron and mold, the smell so strong it burned my eyes. I coughed until my chest felt hollow, until the puddle spread wide and gleamed like tar under the faint silver of moonlight. I thought it was done until the puddle shifted. Not from my heaving, not from the breeze, but on its own. Ripples spread outward, gentle at first, then violent, as though something beneath was struggling to surface. I crawled back, too weak to stand, and watched in horror as bubbles rose in the black liquid, bursting with faint whispers. Then I saw it. Something pale sliding just under the surface, twisting like a worm, like fingers brushing against the glass of an aquarium. The puddle quivered and stretched toward me, as if it remembered me, as if it wanted back inside. That was when I understood. I hadn't just drunk the water. I had carried it, and it was not finished with me. The puddle swelled like it was breathing, and then the movement spread to me. My stomach clenched, my throat burned, and something inside pressed upward, fighting for release. I doubled over, convulsing, hands clawing at the dirt as if I could anchor myself against the storm rising in my body. The first one slid free with a wet sound, pale and glistening, curling onto the floorboards. At first, I thought it was just another worm, slick and blind. Then it lifted its head. The face stopped my breath. Tiny, fragile, unmistakably human. Its eyes bulged like newborn glass, its lips opening and closing with a rasping gasp. My name slipped out of that mouth, faint and broken, but clear enough to shatter what little sense I had left. Another convulsion tore through me, and more of them poured out, writhing, wriggling, pale coils slick with the black water I had swallowed. Each one bore the same impossible feature: small human faces, mouths puckering and whispering, every whisper my name. They crawled across the floor, leaving streaks of dark slime, their bodies twisting in frantic patterns. Some climbed the walls, their gasping voices overlapping into a chorus that filled the ruined house. I could feel the sound vibrating inside my skull, 100 tiny mouths chanting me into their creation. I stumbled back into the corner, my hands slick with sweat and blood from clawing myself raw. They didn't attack, not in the way I feared. Instead, they turned toward me, dragging themselves closer, reaching with their faces tilted up like infants begging to be held. One pressed against my ankle, its tiny mouth brushing my skin, whispering my name again, almost tender. And I realized with a bone-deep terror, they weren't calling for me. They were calling me home. I left the town behind, but the well never let me go. Days stretched into nights, and still the weight sat inside me, shifting, coiling, restless. My stomach is no longer my own. It swells and trembles with things that do not belong to flesh. I know now that every swallow, every drop I forced down in desperation, was not water at all. It was seed. And I was only the soil. At night, when sleep pretends to take me, they stir. The same, pale worms, their tiny faces pressing upward against the lining of my throat. I feel their mouths open, gasping against the back of my tongue, eager for air, eager for release. Sometimes they whisper, and the sound fills my jaw with a vibration I cannot muffle. They call my name as though reminding me who I belong to. But each time it grows less like my name and more like something new. Something that does not belong to any human voice. I no longer vomit them out. They do not need to leave. They have found their home. My body has become the well, my veins filled with black water that pumps not blood, but something thicker, older. I feel them in my chest, in my limbs, stretching, growing. When I open my mouth in the dark, I can taste them pressing forward, their slick bodies wriggling behind my teeth. They wait there, patient as though they know their time is coming. I cover my lips with my hands, but the whispers leak through my fingers, a lullaby of hunger. I fear the night they will finally spill out, hundreds of them, crawling from me to spread into the world. And the worst truth is this: I do not think I will stop them. I think I want them to. The canyon narrowed until the walls pressed in close, and the air turned stale, heavy with the stench of dust that had never known rain. I thought I was alone until I looked down and saw them. Skeletons, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, half buried in the earth. Their spines arched like roots, their rib cages spread like twisted branches. They stood upright in rows, pale bones rising from the soil the way trees grow in a grove. The sight froze me. They were not scattered corpses, not the chaos of death, but arranged, planted, as though the earth itself had chosen to grow them this way. Their skulls tilted upward, jaws locked in silent screams, some leaning into one another as if whispering secrets in eternal stillness. The canyon was not empty. It was a forest made from bodies long forgotten, an orchard where flesh had rotted but form had endured. I stepped carefully, afraid that the crunch of gravel beneath my boots would break the silence they guarded. Every sound echoed back, magnified by the stone walls until it felt like the bones themselves were repeating it, warning the others of my trespass. My breath fogged in front of me, unnatural in the heat, and the canyon grew colder the deeper I walked. There was no wind, no birds, no sky above. Only that pale glow of bone reflecting what little light the world had left. I reached out against every instinct and touched the nearest rib cage. It quivered beneath my hand, faint but real, like the shudder of something sleeping, disturbed by my intrusion. And in that moment, I realized I had not stumbled into a graveyard. I had wandered into a field where the dead still grew, waiting for something, or someone, to harvest them. As the sun bled out behind the cliffs, the canyon sank into a darkness that felt alive. I had thought the skeletons terrifying in daylight, but the night unveiled what the shadows had kept hidden. Their jaws hung open at odd angles, some stretched wide to the sky, as though caught in the instant of a final scream. Others tilted toward the ground, mouths gaping like they had been buried mid-plea. The silence pressed hard at first, until the wind returned. It did not rush down the canyon as I expected. It wove through the rib cages, curled through hollow skulls, whistled between finger bones, stretched toward the surface. The sound was no longer just the wind. It was a choir. Each skeleton became an instrument, each cavity shaping the moan into something unnatural. A low groan rose first, vibrating in the ground, then a high shriek like flutes of sharpened bone. The canyon breathed music made from the dead, an organ of grief and rage. I clutched my ears, but it seeped through, vibrating along my spine until I thought my bones would answer back. The melodies twisted into voices, a chorus of despair that climbed higher and higher until it seemed to swallow the sky. Every note felt directed at me, as though I had been mistaken for a conductor who had returned to claim his orchestra. I staggered between them, desperate to escape. But the sound followed with precision. The longer I listened, the more the screams felt like words. My name bent in the howl, syllables broken and drawn thin. I stumbled into the dark, unable to tell if I was walking deeper or finding my way out. Still the wind played on, each gust making the bones sing. And in that cacophony, I understood. They were not voicing their torment. They were rehearsing, preparing for the moment when they would rise and sing in flesh again. I curled against the canyon wall, wrapping myself in my coat as though fabric could protect me from the voices that slid between the rocks. The night air was sharp, carrying the bitter taste of dust and something older, a sweetness gone rancid. I closed my eyes, praying exhaustion would drag me into sleep. But the music of the bones never ceased. It shifted, bending into something deliberate, something aimed. The groans and shrieks stretched into syllables, long vowels trembling through hollow jaws. I heard hunger first, whispered low through ribs that rattled like empty stomachs. Then thirst, a choking rasp through teeth that had bitten nothing for centuries. The chorus swelled, and the words became clearer, their voices layered so thick I could almost see the vibrations trembling the air. Endless suffering, an eternity of it. And then, worst of all, the plea. They begged for me to lie among them, to plant myself in the soil beside their rooted spines and open my mouth to sing their song forever. I pressed my palms to my ears until the bones of my skull ached, but the words had already sunk inside. They rose from the canyon floor and echoed through my chest, until I wasn't sure if the voices were theirs or mine. The taste of the black water I had once drunk in, another wasteland burned on my tongue, though I hadn't swallowed a drop here. The stars above spun in slow circles, and I felt myself tilt with them. My eyelids grew heavy, not with rest, but with surrender. The melody stroked my thoughts, like fingers combing through hair, coaxing me to let go. And beneath the music, beneath the begging, I felt something deeper, bones shifting slightly, eager to make space for one more. I must have drifted, though I swear I never closed my eyes willingly. One moment I was staring at the constellations twisting above me, the music bleeding into my skull. And the next I woke to a stillness so complete, it stole my breath. The ground beneath me was gone. My back rested against something hard and cold, and when I tried to move, I couldn't. I looked down and saw them, hands, dozens of them, brittle and yellowed, fingers splintered but strong. They clutched my arms, my legs, even my ribs, pinning me in place against the canyon wall. Their touch was dry but insistent, pressing so tightly I could hear my bones creak in answer. The skeletons around me no longer stood silently rooted. Their jaws shifted, opening wider, teeth grinding in slow unison. The sound was like stone against stone, a chorus of gnashing hunger. Their hollow sockets tilted toward me, and though they had no eyes, I felt the weight of their attention settle heavy as stone. I tried to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. The canyon gave it back anyway. My own strangled cry reverberated between the cliffs, warped until it came back as laughter. I thrashed, skin tearing against the sharp edges of bone, but their grip did not loosen. It only grew tighter, fingers splintering as they dug deeper, as if they didn't care if they broke themselves, as long as they broke me too. The music returned then, no longer carried by the wind, but rising directly from the skeletons that bound me. A hymn of hunger, of thirst, their voices no longer begging but demanding. Their song rattled through my chest, as though my ribs had already begun to play along. And in that moment, I knew they weren't holding me down. They were holding me in place until I joined the choir. I don't know where the strength came from. Panic can make a body savage, can turn fear into a weapon sharper than steel. I thrashed with everything I had, twisting, wrenching, until brittle fingers splintered against me. Bones cracked like branches snapping in a fire, fragments raining to the ground. Some cut deep as I tore free, shards lodging in my arms, my legs, even my cheek. I didn't care. I only knew that if I stayed, I would never leave that canyon alive. Or worse, I would leave it singing. I staggered through the orchard, stumbling between the upright skeletons that seemed to lean closer with every step. Their mouths gaped wider, jaws unhinged, as though straining to release a scream that never came. The music swelled, dissonant and furious, chasing me toward the narrow cut of moonlight that marked the canyon's edge. My blood left a trail behind me, dark stains glistening on pale bone, and I knew I was feeding them, even as I fled. When I finally collapsed outside the canyon, the night was silent again. The orchard lay still, a forest of bones frozen in their endless vigil. But I could feel them watching, waiting, their song echoing faintly in the back of my mind. My skin burned where their shards had pierced me, small splinters buried too deep to pull free. Now, far from that canyon, the wounds have closed over, but the bone remains inside. And sometimes, when I'm very still, I hear it. A faint hum, low and steady, rising through my veins like strings plucked in the dark. The song is not loud yet, not full, but it is there, waiting, patient. One night, I fear, it will swell again. And when it does, it will not come from the canyon. It will come from me. The road stretched straight as a blade, vanishing into a horizon that never seemed to move closer. It was no ordinary pavement, no tar or gravel, but a strip of gray ash packed thick and heavy, soft enough to leave prints that crumbled at the edges. Each step I took sank slightly, releasing a puff that rose into the air and clung to me like smoke. Soon it coated my boots, my clothes, even my eyelashes, until I felt less like a traveler and more like one of the burned things that must have fed this place. The sky above was pale and lifeless, the sun blurred into a dull coin by the haze. Breathing was work, each inhale scraping soot against the inside of my throat. The air smelled of something long dead, wood charred beyond recognition, flesh scorched into a memory. I coughed, but the sound vanished instantly, swallowed whole by the thickness around me. The silence was what unnerved me most. Not even wind stirred across the wasteland. The world felt abandoned, but not empty, as if the ash itself carried voices too faint to hear. Every now and then, I swore I caught a whisper hidden in the static of my own breathing. I would stop, straining to listen. But there was nothing except the endless gray and the brittle crunch of ash beneath my weight. I walked because there was nowhere else to go. Step after step, the road pulled me forward, though I could not say why. Perhaps it was the way it seemed alive, as if beneath the layers of soot, something pulsed, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, but deep down, I knew I wasn't walking alone. The ash shifted sometimes, like something beneath the road had begun to stir. The further I walked, the more the silence broke. not with sound, but with shapes rising out of the haze. At first, I thought they were boulders left behind by some ancient fire. But as I drew closer, I saw the twisted metal, the charred husks of vehicles lined up like a funeral procession. Their frames sagged, melted by heat so fierce the steel had run like wax before hardening again. Ash drifted through shattered windows, spilling into cabins where passengers still sat, or what was left of them. They weren't skeletons, not quite. The fire had warped them into shapes that mocked the human form. Torsos fused with seats, arms stretched toward windows, mouths frozen wide in final screams. Blackened teeth gleamed in cracked skulls, catching faint light as though still burning. Some had their fingers pressed against glass that had half melted, their hands preserved in a moment of impossible desperation. I moved between them, each step stirring the ash that blanketed their bodies, settling into eye sockets and hollow chests. My skin crawled with the sensation that they were watching, even though their heads were locked in grotesque angles, faces twisted upward, backward, sideways. The silence clung tighter here, weighted by all the voices that had been torn away in an instant and left behind, trapped in their gaping mouths. When I leaned close to one window, the stench of burned hair and scorched flesh hit me so hard I gagged. I pulled back quickly, but the shape inside seemed to shift, its head tilting toward me, jaw quivering as though trying to speak. I froze, heart clawing against my ribs, but the figure did not move again. Only the open mouth, wide and black, daring me to listen. I turned away, but even as I walked on, I swore I could still hear it screaming inside my head where no air could carry it. Night fell heavy and strange, the ash road glowing faintly under the moon as if it remembered fire. The burned-out cars loomed darker now, their windows glinting weakly, reflecting slivers of pale light. I kept my eyes forward, but the silence was broken by a sound that did not belong. A faint tapping, not wind, not falling soot. A deliberate rhythm, brittle and sharp, like knuckles against glass. I froze, pulse hammering, and turned. Inside the cars, the figures had shifted. Where they had slumped in daylight, now they sat upright, their charred hands raised to the windows. Tap, tap, tap. The sound traveled down the line, each passenger joining the chorus, until the entire road pulsed with it. The glass rattled under the onslaught, but never shattered. I walked faster, trying to ignore them, but their heads turned as I passed, necks creaking as if rusted hinges bound them. Their eyes were nothing but blackened sockets, yet I felt the weight of their gaze, hollow and relentless, pinning me like a hunted animal. The tapping grew frantic, echoing off the husks, 1,000 desperate fists demanding release. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound slipped through, vibrating in my ribs, in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. Each knock seemed closer, as though the glass was thinning with every strike. My reflection flickered in a windshield, and for a terrible moment I saw myself not walking the road, but trapped inside. My own burned hands pressed against the window, my own hollow eyes staring out, pleading for freedom. The tapping followed me long after the last car faded into the haze, a ghostly rhythm etched into my heartbeat. I knew then that if I stopped listening, even for a moment, they would break free, and when they did, they would take me with them. The tapping had grown faint behind me when the sound changed. A groan of rusted metal cut through the stillness, long and low, like the road itself exhaling. I turned slowly, dread already tightening in my chest. One of the cars, a blackened husk with its windows shattered, shuddered on its ruined wheels. The door creaked, inch by inch, until it sagged open with a screech that carried down the empty highway. Inside, the figure that had once been slumped, motionless, began to stir. Ash cascaded from its shoulders as it leaned forward, every movement brittle, fragile, yet unstoppable. Its face was cracked and blackened, lips split like dry clay. But as its jaw opened, the sound that came out was unmistakable. A whisper, rasping and thin, but human enough to chill me. "Ride." The word echoed through the car as though the ash itself carried it, repeated again and again in voices that weren't its own. The passenger raised a hand, joints snapping as it extended toward me. Fingers fused together by melted skin. I could hear more movement now, the shifting of bodies in the other cars, doors rattling, hinges moaning as though the convoy of the dead had begun to wake. I stepped back, my boots sinking deep into the ash road. The figure lurched forward, its head twitching violently, as though its spine no longer remembered how to move. Its mouth cracked wider, flakes of black skin breaking away as it forced the word again, louder this time. "Ride." The others answered, their whispers rising, spilling into the night like smoke. A chorus of charred throats begging me to climb in, to take a seat, to become one of them. I stumbled away, but the open door stayed wide behind me, waiting, patient, like a promise that one day I would accept the invitation. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last, as though the ash itself wanted to hold me still. I did not look back. I told myself if I never turned my head, I could leave the whispering wrecks behind me. But the road does not forgive so easily, and silence is never truly silence out there. It began with a scrape of metal, faint, distant, but growing with every heartbeat. I knew the sound. Wheels dragging, not rolling, pulled across the brittle crust of ash. I walked faster, but the rhythm matched me, steady and relentless, as though the cars had found life again and were following in my wake. I could hear the groan of doors swinging open, slamming shut, over and over, like lungs gasping for breath. The sound multiplied, spreading along the road behind me until it felt like the entire line of burned-out vehicles had risen to crawl after me. The whispers returned too, carried on the stale air, the same word repeated in countless broken voices. "Ride. Ride." A plea and a command, soft enough to sound like an invitation, sharp enough to slice into my nerves. I tried to block it out, but the voices sank through skin and bone, vibrating deep in my chest until my own breath felt borrowed, shared with something else. Even now, far from that road, I hear them. In the quiet hours of night, when the world is still, the sound creeps back. The doors creaking open, the wheels scraping across ash, the voices whispering at the edge of hearing. They are patient. They know one day my strength will falter, and when it does, the convoy will be waiting. The ash road never ends. It only waits for you to take your seat. Hunger had hollowed me out until I felt less like a man, more like a husk, each step dragging me deeper into the barren waste. The field appeared like a miracle at first. Rows of stalks breaking through the dust, crooked but standing, their brittle leaves rattling faintly in the stale wind. My vision swam with weakness, but I swore I saw corn glistening in the dim light, fat and swollen, waiting for my hands. Salvation rising from the dirt. I staggered closer, reaching out to steady myself against the nearest stalk. The husk split open at my touch, and what spilled out was not grain, but something wet and red. It dripped thick down the leaves, staining the gray earth in dark streaks. The smell was sharp, metallic, too familiar. Not sap. Blood. I reeled back, my stomach gnawing at itself, torn between revulsion and need. More husks trembled in the field as though they were aware of me, their twisted ears bending toward the sound of my breath. Each one swelled and cracked, leaking the same crimson fluid that gleamed in the dying sun. I could hear it drip, drop by drop, 1,000 tiny heartbeats feeding the soil. Desperation clawed at my throat. My mind screamed to run, but the hunger was louder, pulling me forward, whispering that food was food, no matter its shape. My hands trembled as I tore open another ear. Inside were no kernels, only rows of hard white shapes gleaming wetly. Teeth. Perfect human teeth embedded in soft red flesh. They clattered when I touched them, chattering against each other like laughter muffled by soil. I stumbled back into the dirt, my stomach twisting in on itself. The field seemed to sway then, stalks bending together in rhythm, as though the whole crop had turned its attention to me. And I understood too late. I had not found food. I had found hunger itself, waiting to feed. The husk split beneath my hands with a wet snap, and I expected the sick gleam of blood again. Instead, what I found made my throat close. Inside the ear was no grain, no flesh, only teeth, neatly arranged in perfect, glistening rows. Human teeth, slick with saliva that should not have been there. They gleamed in the fading light, pearly white against the red pulp that cradled them like gums. I recoiled, but my hunger betrayed me. Some part of me, too far gone with starvation, reached back in, fingertips grazing across their surfaces. The teeth clicked at my touch. First one, then another, and then the whole row began to chatter. A mechanical rhythm, sharp and cruel, the sound of laughter stripped of joy. Before I could pull away, the jaws of the husk clamped down. The teeth bit into my fingers, not deep enough to sever, but hard enough to draw blood, sharp enough to make me scream. I ripped my hand free, tearing skin as I stumbled backward into the dirt. Drops of red slid down my palm, and the stalk swayed eagerly, its ears snapping open wider, teeth clattering with hunger. The others joined in. Across the barren rows, husks began to split, each one filled with gnashing mouths instead of grain. The sound rose into a chorus of chattering, 1,000 tiny jaws biting down in feverish anticipation. My blood dripped onto the soil, and I watched as the stalks bent toward it, leaves trembling, roots groaning beneath the surface. I wrapped my injured hand in cloth, but it was useless. The field had tasted me now. The teeth snapped and clicked in unison, echoing like applause, as though the entire crop had been waiting for this moment. For me to bleed, so they could grow stronger and hungrier. Night came with no stars, only a thick, suffocating dark that clung to the field like smoke. I tried to sleep against the base of a broken fence post, my wounded hand wrapped tight in cloth that was already stiff with blood. The air was damp, heavy with the copper stink of the stalks. Every breath felt stolen. That was when I heard them move. The stalks were no longer standing straight. They bent toward me, one after another, like a wave of twisted spines bowing in unison. Their leaves unfurled and reached across the dirt, curling sharp as claws around my legs, my chest, my arms. When I tried to wrench free, the leaves tightened, rough edges scraping my skin until I bled anew. The field pulsed with the sound of chewing. Low at first, muffled beneath the ground, but unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the dirt and almost retched. Something was feeding just below the surface. Thousands of small mouths gnawing in frantic rhythm. The vibrations crawled up my bones, into my teeth, until it felt like they were chewing through me from the inside. I tried not to scream, but when one stalk bent close enough for its ear to brush my face, I couldn't stop. Its husk split wide, teeth gleaming in the moonless dark, snapping at the air just inches from my skin. The cloth around my hand loosened, and the scent of blood spilled out fresh. The entire field shuddered, as if in delight, the chewing growing louder, closer, until it felt like the soil itself was alive, hungry. I tore myself free of the leaves with every ounce of strength. But even as I stumbled back, I knew the truth. The field was awake now, and it wanted me planted among its roots. By morning, the field seemed still again, but I knew better. The stalks swayed without wind, their crooked shadows bending toward me no matter where I stood. My blood had dried into the soil, and I could feel their roots drinking it. Tugging at me like unseen hands, I had to know what fed them, what grew beneath this cursed earth. With my good hand, I clawed into the dirt at the base of the nearest stalk. The soil was damp, darker than it should have been, clinging to my skin like clay. Only a few inches down, my fingers struck bone. I froze, then scraped harder, uncovering a pale curve that resolved into a skull. Its jaw trembled as I pulled it free, teeth snapping shut and open in a ghastly rhythm, chewing though nothing remained to eat. I stumbled back, but the sound spread. All around me, the ground clicked and clattered, jawbones working in unison beneath the soil. I dropped to my knees again, digging wildly, uncovering more. Skulls stacked on top of one another, their jaws grinding, gnashing, never still. The field was a graveyard, each stalk rooted in death, nourished by endless chewing mouths that refused to stay silent even in the grave. Their teeth had not rotted, their jaws not broken. Each skull bit at the dirt, feeding the stalks above with the memory of hunger. My stomach turned, but I could not look away. The husks rattled in their rows, as though the skulls below were breathing life up into them. The chattering grew louder, faster, until I could no longer tell if it was rising from the ground or from inside my head. I pressed my palms to my ears, but still I heard it, relentless, gnawing, a promise of what I would become when they buried me too deep to scream. I ran until my lungs felt shredded, until the field of stalks shrank behind me into a smear of gray against the horizon. Still, I could hear it, the gnashing of teeth beneath the soil, the rattling laughter of jaws that never stopped feeding. I swore the sound followed me, carried in the rhythm of my footsteps, echoing with every ragged breath. But the true horror came later. When exhaustion dropped me to my knees, I clutched my stomach and felt it shift. Not with hunger, not with emptiness, but with growth. A restless stirring beneath my ribs, the same writhing I had heard in the earth. I doubled over, choking on bile, convinced I was about to vomit blood. Nothing came but a pressure that clawed deeper with each spasm. That night, I dreamed of the stalks bending low, their husks splitting wide to reveal rows of perfect teeth smiling at me. I woke with sweat burning my eyes and the taste of iron thick on my tongue. My gut twisted again, and I pressed my hands against it, horrified at what I felt beneath the skin. Tiny ridges, hard and sharp, pushing outward like a mouth waiting to open. Now, when hunger gnaws at me, it isn't the hollow ache I once knew. It is chewing, deep inside, teeth sprouting where no teeth should be. They grind against one another, desperate, hungry, as if they're feeding on me from within. I try to eat, but it doesn't matter. No food satisfies. The more I swallow, the harder they bite, as though they know what they want isn't grain or meat. It's me. And sometimes, when the hunger is sharpest, I can hear it echoing in my ears. The chattering of 1,000 jaws, not from the field anymore, but from my own body, waiting for the day I split open and join their harvest. I had been walking for days, lips split, tongue swollen, throat raw with thirst. The wasteland gave nothing but dust and the taste of blood in the back of my mouth. When I first heard it, I thought it was a trick, wind hissing through the cracked stones. But then I saw it, winding black across the earth like a vein too wide to be natural. A river, at last, glistening under the dim light. I dropped to my knees without thinking, my body moving faster than my mind could warn me. The water was thick, almost tar, but it moved like liquid, flowing with an urgency that pulled at itself. It smelled of iron and smoke, bitter enough to sting my nose, but thirst burned hotter than fear. I cupped my hands and drank deep. It was cold, unnaturally so, stabbing my teeth and chest as if I had swallowed ice. The taste was foul, metallic, and oily, coating my throat and tongue until I could barely breathe. Yet I kept drinking, desperate, shaking, trying to silence the fire in my body. The liquid clung to me, refusing to slide all the way down, sticking like grease in my gut. When I lifted my head, my reflection rippled in the black current. For a moment, it looked like me. Then the surface shifted, and the face staring back widened its grin. Its teeth gleamed too sharp, too many, stretching beyond the lips I knew. My reflection leaned closer, even though I was still, its eyes wet and glistening with ink. I recoiled, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. But the taste would not leave. It had already soaked into me. The water was inside now, pulsing through veins that suddenly felt heavier, slower, as if they no longer belonged entirely to me. And the reflection in the river kept smiling, even when I turned away. The black current rippled, though there was no wind, no stone to break its flow. I leaned over it again, too weak to rise, my mouth still slick with the taste of iron. The water reflected me, but wrong, off by a breath, as though it remembered me imperfectly. Its mouth stretched wider than mine ever could, lips peeling back to reveal rows of jagged teeth that had no place in my skull. The eyes glistened wet and heavy, brimming not with tears, but with tar. Thick drops sliding down its cheeks and bleeding into the river below. I recoiled, but the reflection did not. It leaned closer, its movements delayed yet deliberate, breaking from mine entirely. Its hand rose, dripping black, and beckoned. Slow, patient, curling one finger at a time until the gesture became irresistible. The river whispered with it, a low hum like a voice beneath water, urging me forward. I wanted to turn away. I told myself I would stand, leave, never touch it again. But my body betrayed me. My knees edged closer to the bank, the ash crumbling beneath my weight. My throat tightened, not with thirst this time, but with longing, as though the black liquid had already claimed me and now demanded more. The reflection's grin widened until its face cracked, tar spilling from the seams. The hum rose into words, garbled but clear enough to twist my stomach. It wanted me closer. It wanted me inside. The river shifted violently, black foam clawing at the bank like fingers reaching for my wrists. The sound of rushing water became laughter, bubbling and cruel, and I realized with horror that I had not found salvation in this place. I had found a mirror that wanted to swallow me whole. That night, sleep came like drowning. One moment I lay on the hard earth with the taste of ash in my mouth, and the next I was sinking. The river had swallowed me whole, dragging me down into a darkness so thick it pressed against my chest like a weight. The current coiled around my limbs, pulling me deeper, deeper, until I no longer knew which way was the surface. The water was bitter in my lungs, thick as tar. I tried to scream but only choked, my own voice bubbling into silence. Faces drifted past me in the black, pale and swollen, eyes wide with a terror that had never ended. Their lips opened, but no words came. Instead, each mouth poured streams of the same black liquid, endless ribbons of tar that curled around me, filling the river with their poison. The more they vomited, the heavier it grew, the current thickening into sludge that clung to my skin and hair. Their hands reached for me as they floated by, grasping, pulling, their nails scraping lines into my arms. Some pressed their faces close, spilling the blackness directly against my lips, as if trying to force it back inside me to make me drink again. I gagged, but the river itself seemed to breathe through them, using their bodies as vessels. The deeper I sank, the more faces appeared, layered upon each other, a swarm of the drowned. Some I thought I recognized, though I couldn't say from where. Their skin sloughed away in the current, but their eyes, those terrible eyes, never left mine. They weren't just lost souls. They were reflections. When I woke gasping on the riverbank, my mouth was full of grit, but my throat still burned with the taste of tar. And the worst part was the certainty that the dream hadn't ended. It had only let me out for a while. I woke to my own body betraying me. My chest convulsed, my throat spasmed, and a stream of thick, black water spilled past my lips. It poured out in violent heaves, coating the dirt beside me, soaking into the ash like ink into paper. The smell was bitter, metallic, and wrong. Each gasp drew more of it up, until I thought I would drown on dry land. When at last the retching slowed, I dragged myself forward, trembling, my hands slipping in the puddle I had made. That was when I saw it. Not my face in the shallow pool, but something else. The reflection was grinning, lips cracked wide, teeth too sharp, too many. Its tar-filled eyes blinked up at me with a wet hunger. I recoiled, but there was no escape. Every puddle along the bank showed the same twisted smile, the same reflection leaning closer. Some whispered so faintly I thought it was the hiss of the wind, but the words grew clearer with every breath. Back to the river. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the whisper wasn't only in the air. It was in my chest, vibrating along my ribs, slithering through my veins. The black water inside me responded, humming like it was alive. My reflection's grin widened with each heartbeat, as if it knew I could not resist forever. The puddles rippled, though I had not touched them, each reflection raising its hand in unison to beckon me closer. The earth around me felt soft, wet, as though the river had seeped beneath the ground and was waiting just under the surface. My body trembled with thirst, not for clean water, but for the same black current I had tried to flee. And in every whisper, every ripple, I heard the truth. The river had not given me its poison to kill me. It had given it to bring me back. I never found the courage to go back. The river's voice echoed behind me long after I staggered from its banks. But I forced myself into the wasteland, walking until my legs gave out and the horizon swallowed every trace of black water. I told myself I was free, that I had broken from its grip. For a time, I almost believed it. But the river never needed me to return. It carried itself with me. I learned that the first night the skies broke open and rain washed the dust from the earth. I stood beneath the storm, desperate for the taste of clean water on my tongue, and instead felt a film spread across my skin. Not fresh, not pure. A black sheen glistened on my arms, beading on my face, slicking my hands until I could smell the same metallic rot that had poisoned me before. The droplets that slid down my cheeks tasted of tar. I spat them out, but they clung to my lips, staining them. When I looked at my reflection in a shallow puddle, the grin was waiting, as wide as ever, eyes swimming with that endless ink. Now, every storm is a reminder. The rain does not cleanse me, it marks me, coats me, binds me closer. I feel the river in my veins, thickening with every drop. My pulse slowed by its pull. When thunder rolls, I swear I hear laughter hidden in the crack of the sky, a bubbling echo that belongs to the drowned. I never returned to the Black River, but it has followed me, seeping into every shadow, every storm. And sometimes, when the rain runs heavy enough, I feel myself tilting, leaning toward the earth, ready to sink back into its current. The river is patient. It knows I belong to it now. The city rose from the wasteland like a blackened skeleton, its bones jutting into the sky. Towers that once clawed upward now sagged and leaned, their steel frames warped by fire. The streets were carpeted in gray, a soft ash that swallowed my footsteps, leaving no sound to mark my passage. Smoke still coiled from broken windows, though there was no flame left to feed it. The buildings watched me with their hollow sockets, glass long since shattered, shadows lingering like memories behind the empty frames. Everywhere I looked, I saw absence. Signs without letters, cars without wheels, doorways leading to rooms that no longer existed. Yet the air was not silent. It was heavy with whispers, the kind that flicker at the edge of hearing, where breath feels too close against the ear. The ash stirred with faint drafts that didn't match the stillness of the air, curling into shapes that broke apart before I could name them. I passed a street lamp bent double, its post melted as though some sun had come too close. Underneath it lay a heap of black forms that might once have been people. The outlines of faces still clung to the ash, eyes wide, mouths open. They seemed caught mid-scream, frozen in the instant of destruction. My stomach twisted, but my thirst and hunger dragged me forward. Above, the sky sagged low, colorless and thick with smoke. Time felt broken here, as though the city had burned 1,000 times and never stopped burning. I kept walking, though every step pulled me deeper into a place that was less ruin and more grave. I should have turned back. I should have run. But something in the air pulled me onward, as though the city itself had been waiting all along for someone to walk through its remains. The streets stretched on like veins of ash, twisting between towers that leaned close as if conspiring over my head. The silence pressed against me until my own heartbeat became too loud, each pulse a drum echoing in the dead air. Then it came, the sound that broke the stillness. Laughter. It carried between the burned-out buildings, sharp and brittle, not rising from any throat I had ever known. It was jagged, splintering, like glass cracking under sudden heat, fragments scattering through the hollow corridors of the city. The sound cut me open with every echo, unnatural in its rhythm, starting high, dipping low, then snapping off too suddenly, as if the thing that laughed had no lungs, no breath. I froze, every muscle screaming to run, but the sound shifted, ricocheting from tower to tower surrounding me. It was close, then distant, then impossibly above me, trickling down from windows that had no faces behind them. The laughter thickened into layers, more voices joining until it was a chorus of shattering, as though the city itself mocked me with broken glass teeth. Ash swirled at my feet, stirred by a wind I could not feel on my skin. The shadows in the doorways twitched, stretching longer, wider, as though leaning closer to listen. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, but I forced a word into the air. A whisper, meant only for myself. "Who's there?" The laughter answered by cutting short, leaving a silence even heavier than before. My skin crawled with the absence of sound, my ears straining, desperate for anything to fill it. Then faint and low, it returned right at my back. Not echoing now, close, too close. I spun, but there was only gray, only ruin. Still, I knew something had heard me, and it was not finished laughing yet. When night came, it fell suddenly, swallowing the last smear of light behind the broken skyline. The city grew darker than any place I had ever known, as though the stars themselves refused to shine upon its ruins. I built no fire, too afraid of what might see it, but I soon realized light was coming regardless. It did not come from me. It came from them. At first, I thought the flames were embers drifting on the air, carried from some forgotten fire smoldering underground. But then the shapes formed, figures pacing slowly down streets that no longer existed, their outlines black and brittle, their chests aglow with fire trapped behind cracked ribs. Each step they took stirred no sound, no weight, only the hiss of flame licking bone. They carried torches too, though not of wood. Long femurs bleached white, each crowned with fire that burned without smoke. Their movements were ritualistic, weaving through collapsed buildings as if the streets were still whole, as if the city still lived. Their shadows stretched across ruins that could no longer contain them, filling windows, doorways, and hollow towers with echoes of life that had been incinerated long ago. I pressed myself against a wall, praying they would not see me. But their hollow heads turned in unison, and though no eyes glowed in their sockets, I felt the heat of their gaze. The fire in their chests pulsed brighter, as though my presence stoked it. One lifted its torch, pointing into the dark, and the others followed, a silent procession carrying light through streets that had burned to nothing. The laughter returned then, faint but unmistakable, rising with the flicker of their flames. And in its cracks, in its sharp, broken rhythm, I understood. This city was not dead. It was still burning, and I had just been invited to walk with the fire. I tried to stay still, tried to make myself smaller than the rubble around me. But one of them broke from the procession. Its steps were slow, deliberate, each one leaving behind a faint glow in the ash that vanished as quickly as it came. The fire in its chest burned brighter with every pace, ribs glowing red like the bars of a furnace. It stopped before me, towering though its bones seemed brittle, its charred frame crackling as if it were always on the verge of collapsing into dust. For a moment, I prayed it would pass, that it would continue its silent march with the others. But then its arm lifted. The skin, what little clung to it, was burned black and split like coal, the sinew beneath glowing faintly with embers. The hand reached toward me. I pressed back into the wall, but there was nowhere left to retreat. When its fingers brushed my arm, the pain was instant and unbearable. My flesh sizzled, blistering beneath the faintest touch. The smell of my own burning skin filled my nose, and I bit back a scream, choking on the stench of myself. The figure tilted its head as though studying me. The fire in its chest flared, spilling sparks through its ribs, and I realized the mark it left on me was no accident. It was a gift, a claim, a brand to mark me as something that belonged to this city of flame. When it pulled its hand away, the burn still smoldered, blackened and cracked, yet glowing faintly with heat. I clutched it, but the fire would not die. It pulsed beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. The figure lingered one moment longer, its faceless gaze fixed on me, before it turned and rejoined the others. But the burning did not fade. It has never faded. And I know now that the city's fire is inside me, waiting for its time to spread. I ran until my legs buckled, until the ash filled my throat and scraped raw at my lungs. Behind me, the city smoldered in silence, its towers leaning in the dark, the figures drifting like sparks carried on a dying wind. I thought distance might save me, that if I could put enough wasteland between us, the fire would forget my name. But the mark on my arm still burned, glowing faint beneath the skin, pulsing like it carried its own memory of flame. When I collapsed into the dust miles away, the air should have been clean, empty, barren. Yet the smell of smoke clung to me. Not campfire smoke, not wood or grass. The acrid sting of steel and flesh charred together. The smell of a city still burning even though I had left its ruins far behind. I pressed my face into the earth, praying it would smother the scent, but it only grew stronger. My skin felt hot, my heart beat heavy, each throb echoing like footsteps in hollow streets. When I closed my eyes, the world around me vanished, and I was back there, standing between blackened towers, the laughter cracking like shattered glass, the figures moving with fire in their chests. They had not stayed behind. They never needed to. The city was not bound to its ruins. It had burned itself into me, carried on blistered skin and poisoned breath. Every time I blink, I see torches of bone flickering in the dark. Every time I breathe, I taste smoke. I fled the burned city, but it follows without walls, without streets, without shape. It walks with me now, its fire waiting, its laughter curling at the edges of silence. And when the mark on my arm pulses hardest, I know the truth. I am already burning, even if no one else can see the flames yet. It rose from the desert heat like a mirage, but the closer I came, the more solid it became. A train, black as soot, standing alone in the wasteland with no rails beneath it. The sand stretched out flat in every direction, no station, no road, no reason for it to be there at all. The locomotive loomed taller than it should have, its iron body pitted with rust, but the paint beneath still gleamed dark, as if it had been polished only yesterday. The engine's front gaped like a mouth, a circular void where no light reached. The air around it was colder, shadows gathering beneath its wheels, even though the sun scorched the desert floor. My boots sank slightly into the sand as I circled it, half expecting it to vanish, to dissolve back into the haze like a trick of thirst. But it didn't. It stood, massive and silent, waiting. The cars stretched back farther than I could count, vanishing into the shimmer of the horizon. Windows lined each one, but the glass was too dark to see through. I thought I caught movement once, a flicker of pale shapes passing from one window to the next. But when I blinked, the glass only reflected the desert's emptiness. I pressed my palm against the metal. It was cold. Not the kind of cold you find in shade, but the kind that seeps deep, the kind that feels alive. My reflection wavered in its surface, pale and distorted, as if the train was already pulling me into it. I should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to flee back into the wasteland, but thirst and exhaustion held me there. The silence wrapped tighter with every breath, and I realized what unsettled me most. It wasn't the fact that the train had no tracks. It was that the engine was still humming, low and steady, like a heartbeat in the iron. The metal steps groaned beneath my weight, the sound swallowed quickly by the desert silence. I pushed the door open, and the air that met me was colder still, stale and sweet like rot long preserved. Inside, the dim light revealed rows upon rows of seats, perfectly aligned, stretching back farther than the length of the car should have allowed. And in every seat sat a body. They were not fresh, but neither were they dust. Corpses slumped forward, their spines curved, their heads bowed as though asleep. Their skin had peeled away in places, leaving parchment-thin flesh clinging to yellow bone. Some still wore tattered clothes, scorched at the edges, marked by stains too dark to guess at. But what chilled me most were their hands. Each one clutched a slip of paper, brittle and yellowed, tickets still held tight between skeletal fingers. The silence was unbearable. My own breathing sounded too loud, echoing against the metal walls as though the train itself listened. I walked the aisle slowly, eyes darting between the passengers, half expecting one to stir. Their heads hung low, chins pressed to their chests, but when I leaned close, I saw their mouths. Open, every one of them. Hollow jaws sagging wide, as if each had died mid-scream. I wanted to turn back, but the aisle seemed longer than when I entered. The rows stretched endlessly, passengers multiplying with every step. The windows were black, reflecting not the corpses, but only me, a lone figure moving through an eternity of seats. The train hummed beneath me, steady and patient. My hand brushed one of the tickets, and it crumbled to dust, releasing a sound like a sigh. For a heartbeat, I swore every corpse lifted its head, just a fraction, just enough for me to feel the weight of empty sockets following me down the aisle. The air shifted before it happened, a sudden pressure that made my ears ache. Then the doors behind me slammed shut with a violence that shook the walls. The sound echoed through the car like a final verdict. I spun back, my heart hammering, but the handles were already sealed tight, metal fused as though welded in an instant. The corpses did not move, yet I felt them stir, as though the closing of the doors had given them purpose. The floor trembled beneath my boots. A deep groan rolled through the cabin, and then came the shriek, iron screaming against stone, a grinding roar that clawed at my teeth and skull. The train lurched forward, not slow, not steady, but with a violent pull, as though something had ripped it from the earth itself. My stomach dropped, and I nearly fell into the aisle, catching myself on the arm of a seat. Through the windows, the desert streaked by, sand flung into the air in massive clouds. But there were no rails, no ties, no path. The locomotive tore itself across the wasteland, carving scars into the earth where none had been before. The corpses swayed gently with the motion, heads bobbing as if nodding in agreement with the impossible journey. The noise was relentless. The wheels screeched, metal on nothing, an endless wail that set every nerve in my body on edge. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't just outside. It was inside me, vibrating through bone and blood, sinking into my chest until I felt hollow too. I stumbled to the nearest window, desperate for escape, but the glass reflected only the car's interior. Behind me, rows of bowed heads and skeletal grins stretched on forever. And in the reflection, I saw my own face beginning to bow as well. The motion of the train rocked the corpses gently, their heads swaying with each jolt of the wheels. I tried not to look at them, tried to fix my eyes on the endless smear of desert outside the windows. But then the hum in the air shifted. It thickened, pressing against me like a storm waiting to break. And that was when the first head lifted. Its neck cracked as it rose, dry joints grinding like stone on stone. Empty sockets locked onto me, bottomless holes where eyes had once been. Another followed, and then another, until the sound of creaking bones filled the car. Slowly, in dreadful unison, every passenger lifted their head. The sockets turned toward me all at once, hundreds of hollow gazes fastening like hooks into my flesh. My legs buckled beneath the weight of their attention. Then their jaws sagged wider. Mouths already open stretched impossibly farther, skin tearing where it still clung, bone splitting at the hinge. A scream erupted, not in the air, not in the ears, but in the marrow of my bones. I heard nothing and everything at once. Silence so sharp it rang, slicing through me like glass. Their mouths gaped wider, black pits that seemed to drink in what little light remained. Rows upon rows of them, screaming soundlessly, filling the train with a pressure that made my chest collapse. I staggered backward, clutching at my ears though there was no sound to block. The corpses leaned toward me, jaws unhinged, the scream growing heavier, crushing me beneath its weight. The windows shook, the walls groaned, the very metal of the train bowed inward. But still, the passengers screamed in silence. And in that unbearable emptiness, I knew the truth. The hollow train had never needed tracks, never needed sound. It only needed me to listen. I don't remember deciding. I only remember the instinct to survive. The way my body hurled itself toward the shuddering window as the hollow mouths gaped wider around me. The glass cracked beneath my fists, splintering like ice, and I flung myself through. For a heartbeat, I felt weightless, the desert stretching wide beneath me. Then the ground rose up like a blade. The sand was not soft. It struck like stone, tearing my skin open, grinding grit into raw wounds. I rolled, each impact jarring through bone, until I lay sprawled in the dust, bleeding and broken, but alive. Behind me, the hollow train screeched across the wasteland, wheels sparking against nothing, its scream echoing inside my skull. I crawled to my knees, coughing blood and sand, and dared to look back. It was already vanishing into the horizon, impossibly fast, dragging shadows in its wake. The windows glowed faint for a moment, as if the passengers still stared out, watching me crawl away. Then it was gone, leaving no track, no mark, no proof it had ever existed. Only the ringing in my bones remained, the echo of silence that had threatened to break me in two. I should be relieved, but the escape was not freedom. At night, when the desert wind keens low, I hear it again. A horn, distant but clear, howling through the darkness. Sometimes I wake with sand in my mouth and the taste of iron on my tongue, convinced I had boarded again in my sleep. The hollow train never needed rails. It runs where it pleases, across sand, across silence, across memory. And I know one night, when my body is too weak to resist, I will hear that horn closer. I will feel the hum beneath my feet. And the train will be waiting for me to take my seat. It began as a low rumble, a vibration that shivered through the dust beneath my boots. I thought at first it was thunder, some far-off promise of rain. But then the horizon split open. A wall of light bled upward, too orange, too violent, until I realized it wasn't light at all. It was fire. The wind had caught it, lifted it, carried it like a living thing across the wasteland. The storm rolled forward in, a wave, a curtain of flame, bending and twisting, pushed faster by invisible hands. The sound was monstrous. Not the crackle of wood in a hearth, but the roar of 1,000 forests burning at once. The air ahead of it shimmered, warping the world into shapes that writhed and crawled. I could feel the heat long before it reached me, a furnace blast that scalded my skin and stripped the air from my lungs. I staggered backward, dust clinging to the sweat already pouring down my face. There was nowhere to run. The land was flat and endless, no stone to hide behind, no hollow to crawl into. The firestorm stretched from horizon to horizon, sealing off the sky itself. Ash swirled in the advancing wind, gray snow that seared where it landed. My clothes smoked, fabric curling before the flames had even touched me. The wind carried more than heat. It carried voices, faint, ragged, broken, as though the fire had swallowed the last screams of the world and now spat them back across the wasteland. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voices rode the air itself, too deep to escape. They begged, they warned, they wept. And as the storm drew closer, I realized the voices weren't coming from the wind. They were coming from the fire, from everything it had already consumed. I wrapped my arms across my face, burying myself in my own flesh as if that could shield me. The heat seared through instantly, peeling skin from my hands in strips that curled and blackened in the air. I staggered forward blindly, choking on the smoke that had no source but everywhere at once. The wind was no longer air. It was fire given breath, a furnace that screamed as it tore across the wasteland. And within it, I heard them. At first faint, buried beneath the roar, but then clear, undeniable. Voices. They rose and fell with the gusts, weaving through the flames as if the storm itself spoke. Not strangers, not faceless cries carried from the dead. They knew me. They called me by name, syllables stretched thin, warped by the crackle of burning flesh. I froze, terror rooting me even as the storm blistered my skin. The voices came closer, layering over one another, each tone too familiar. I heard my mother. I heard my brother. I heard friends long lost to the wasteland, each one screaming for me, begging me to come closer, to step into the fire. Their words melted together, their pleas reshaping into commands. The heat drove tears down my face, but even those burned before they could fall. I tried to cover my ears, but the voices burrowed through bone, vibrating in my skull until they became my own thoughts. I whispered my name without meaning to, repeating it in time with them, until I could no longer tell if I was answering or calling myself into the storm. The fire twisted shapes into the haze ahead, silhouettes forming, walking, reaching with arms of smoke and flame. And when they opened their mouths, I realized the voices hadn't been behind the storm at all. They had been waiting inside it, calling me closer, calling me home. The storm swallowed everything, sky and earth alike, until there was no direction left to flee. The air thickened with ash, choking, clinging, layering itself onto my skin until I felt more dust than flesh. But the ash did not drift as it should have. It twisted in the wind, gathering, shaping. Soon I saw them. They came in waves, gray figures stumbling out of the fire, their bodies made entirely of ash, pressed together by the storm's breath. Their faces flickered, sometimes whole, sometimes crumbling, features collapsing only to rebuild again with the next gust. They moved like the living, but their steps dissolved beneath them, leaving trails of soot in the air. They did not look at me, not at first. They walked past, slow and broken, mouths opening as if to scream. Instead of sound, smoke poured out, thick, black, curling tendrils that slithered into the fire and vanished. Their jaws stayed wide, ash cracking at the hinges, empty eye sockets glowing faintly as embers pulsed deep inside. One staggered close enough that I could see its teeth, blackened nubs grinding down to powder. Its mouth gaped, releasing a plume of smoke so hot it blistered my cheek. The ash smeared across my skin where its hand brushed me, staining me gray. And in that instant, I felt a pull, a longing, as if my body wanted to join them, to scatter into dust and walk the storm forever. More came, crowding the wind, their mouths stretching wider, endless smoke pouring out to feed the flames. Each plume seemed to whisper something in its curl, words I couldn't quite catch but knew were meant for me. I pressed my arms tighter across my face, but the ash clung heavier, creeping into my nose, my mouth. And when I tried to cry out, only smoke left my lips. It staggered out of the storm and seized me before I could move. Its hands were brittle, flaking away even as they dug into my shoulders, yet their grip was iron. Ash cascaded down its arms, but still it clung, pulling me close until its face pressed against mine. The ember glow in its sockets flickered, brightening as though my presence fed it. Its mouth opened wider, jaw cracking, and the smoke that poured out carried words. Broken, rasping, yet sharp enough to slice through the roar of the fire. Secrets, names I should not know. Places buried long before the Wasteland was born. It whispered of fire older than the sun, flames that had consumed worlds before mine. It told me I was chosen, not spared, carried here by the storm to learn what it could not release. The words burned worse than the heat. They crawled into my ear, down my throat, until I felt them sear into my lungs. I tried to wrench free, but the figure's jaw pressed closer, bones scraping against my skin. Its whispers turned frantic, desperate, as if it was pouring everything left of itself into me. Then the sound broke off. I felt its jaw splinter, crumble, its head collapsed against my shoulder, scattering into dust that coated my lips, my tongue, my teeth. The rest of its body dissolved in the next gust, vanishing back into the storm, leaving me alone, but not free. The secrets it forced into me still burned. I could feel them writhing beneath my ribs, a second voice whispering inside my chest, a hunger that wasn't mine. The storm howled around me, but the louder sound came from within. It wasn't the figure anymore. It was me, whispering those same words into the fire, as though I had always known them. Somehow, I stumbled free. The wall of fire broke apart behind me, thinning into shreds of smoke that trailed across the horizon. My body collapsed into the dust, skin blistered, clothes scorched to tatters, but I was alive. The wasteland stretched quiet and gray, the silence a mercy after the roar of the storm. For a moment, I thought I had left it all behind. But when I drew my first steady breath, I felt it, the weight in my lungs, heavy and foreign. The air did not taste clean. It tasted burnt. My chest ached as though filled with embers. When I exhaled, a faint ribbon of smoke curled from my lips, black and bitter. It drifted into the air, twisting as though reluctant to vanish. Then I heard them again, the voices. Not faint now, not hidden in the wind. They spilled out with the smoke, whispers threading together, rising from my breath like secrets freed. Some laughed, cracked and jagged. Others sobbed, their cries strangled by the haze. One spoke my name in a tone so familiar it froze my blood. I clamped a hand over my mouth, but the smoke forced its way between my fingers, seeping out, curling into shapes that almost looked human before they scattered. My lungs convulsed, each cough releasing another chorus, another flood of words that weren't mine. The storm had ended, but it had not left me. It had moved inside me, settled deep, and now my breath was no longer my own. The wasteland is quiet again, but the silence means nothing. Each exhale betrays me, each sigh carrying the storm back into the world. I escaped the scorched wind, yes, but I know what waits When the next breath comes too deep, too long, I will open my mouth and the fire will answer back. The world disappeared into white, so bright it felt like standing inside a mirror. Salt spread in every direction, endless and flat, the horizon smudged by heat. The sun blazed above, merciless, doubling itself in the gleam of the ground until it felt like there were two suns burning holes straight through me. My boots crunched on the brittle crust, each step ringing hollow like walking on glass. At first, I thought it beautiful, almost holy in its stillness. But beauty soon soured into dread. There was no sound, no shadow, no change. Just an infinite glare that erased all measure of distance. I could not tell how far I had come or how much farther I had to go. The air shimmered in waves, bending the white into illusions that shifted like water. I swore I saw shapes out there, ridges, walls, even doorways. But when I blinked, they dissolved, leaving nothing but the flat expanse. My lips split, my tongue cracked against my teeth. Thirst gnawed at me, crueler in this place where the ground itself promised water but offered poison. I knelt once and brushed the surface. The crystals clung sharp to my fingers, burning small cuts into my skin. When I licked them in desperation, the salt scorched my mouth, drawing the last of the moisture from my throat. The silence pressed heavier than the heat. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of my own pulse. It was as though the flats had swallowed the world, and I had wandered into its stomach. I turned, searching for my own footprints, but the glare erased them as quickly as I made them. There was no path, no marker, no way out, only white above, white below, and the growing certainty that the salt would keep me forever. Another statue bleached under its endless sun. The silence broke with a sound so faint, I thought it was only the ringing in my ears. A brittle snap beneath my boots, then another, until the salt crust split in jagged lines. I stumbled back as the ground beneath me fractured like glass, the cracks racing outward in veins that glared white against white. The flats weren't solid at all. They were a shell, hiding what lay beneath. The earth caved slightly, groaning under my weight, and through the thin slits, I saw shapes buried in the salt. Bodies? Countless bodies entombed in the crystalline ground, preserved in pale perfection. Their faces stared up at me, eyes wide, lips pulled back into eternal screams that no one had ever heard. Salt crusted their lashes, their hair, their teeth, locking them forever in a prison of frozen agony. I dropped to my knees, staring down into the fissures, unable to look away. Some of them looked fresh, skin stretched tight, bloodless but whole. Others were hollowed, their flesh long drained, bones gleaming white beneath translucent layers of salt. Their hands reached upward, fingers curled against the crystal, as if they had been clawing desperately for release until the earth hardened around them. The cracks widened with a sharp pop, and a wave of cold air rushed from below. It carried with it a faint, metallic tang, almost like blood that had never dried. The bodies seemed to shift beneath the surface, their wide eyes rolling, their frozen jaws quivering just enough to send a tremor through my chest. The salt shimmered as if alive, as if it still fed on their endless screams, pulling them tighter into its grip. My own reflection stared back in the crystal, pale and cracked. And for the first time, I wondered if the flats weren't just a prison for them. Maybe they were a mouth. And maybe it was already trying to swallow me too. When the sun finally bled into the horizon, I thought relief would come with the dark. Instead, the flats grew stranger, more alive. The blinding glare faded into a ghostly glow, the salt shimmering faintly under the moon, as though lit from within. I lay still for a moment, exhausted, until I heard it, the faint grinding of crystals shifting against one another, like teeth gnashing in the silence. The ground trembled beneath me. Then it began to rise. Sheets of salt cracked upward from the flat expanse, jagged slabs pushing into the air, rearranging themselves into walls. They grew taller, sharper, curving around me until the endless horizon was gone. I was no longer standing on a vast plain. I was standing inside a maze. The walls pulsed faintly in the moonlight, crystalline veins glowing as though something deep inside them was alive. I touched one and recoiled. The salt was warm, not from the sun, but from within, as if it had a heartbeat. My fingers came away damp with brine, and when I lifted them to my lips in desperation, the taste was not water, but blood. The whispers started then. At first I thought it was wind, though there was none. The voices came from the walls themselves, faint echoes of those entombed within, guiding me, taunting me, urging me deeper into the labyrinth. Their tones were pleading one moment, mocking the next, but always pulling, always coaxing me to keep walking. I obeyed because I had no choice. Every turn narrowed, every path twisted back on itself, the salt creaking louder as though closing behind me. The maze was not built to hold me for long. It was building itself tighter, closer, until it would seal completely. And I realized then, with dread sinking into my bones, that the salt was not a prison I had found. It was a prison being built around me. The maze shuddered as though it had grown impatient. Cracks split through the walls, jagged veins bursting outward, and from within those fissures, the bodies began to emerge. I had seen them buried earlier, preserved in silent terror beneath the flats, but now they rose, breaking free of their crystal tombs. They came stumbling first, dragging themselves into the narrow corridors, their limbs stiff, their skin flaking into white shards with every step. Their faces were hollow, lips split to expose teeth rimmed in salt, eyes clouded but still burning with a hunger I couldn't name. Their movements sharpened as they neared, their joints popping into place, their steps steadier, faster. Each one carried something in its hands. At first, I thought they were fragments of the walls clinging to their fingers. But no, the salt had formed into blades, jagged knives that shimmered faintly under the moon's pale light. They scraped the weapons along the walls as they came, dragging long lines that shrieked like nails across glass. The sound burrowed into my skull, forcing my hands to my ears. But it was useless. The knives sang, and the figures quickened their pace, shoulders jerking in spasms as if the salt itself was pulling their strings. I backed away, stumbling through the twisting corridor. But every turn funneled me closer to them. Their blades clashed against the walls, showering me in sharp flakes, cutting my arms as I shielded my face. One figure lunged, its mouth splitting wider than human, shards breaking loose from its jaw as it hissed. The maze pulsed with their advance, the walls closing tighter with every heartbeat. Their knives gleamed brighter, catching the glow of the salt veins as though sharpened by the prison itself. And in their hollow eyes, I saw not rage, not mercy, but a single command. They would carve me into the walls, another prisoner sealed in crystal, screaming forever. When I opened my eyes, the maze was gone. The walls had vanished. The figures with their salt knives dissolved into nothing, leaving only the wasteland stretching wide beneath the pale dawn. I lay on the edge of the flats, the salt plain gleaming behind me as though I had never stepped into it at all. My skin burned, my throat was torn raw, but I was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. For a time I believed it had been a dream, some hallucination born of thirst and heat. I tried to tell myself the prison was only in my mind. But then I touched my lips. They were cracked, split wide, and lined with a hard crust. Salt clung there, thick enough that I could scrape it free with my fingernails. I spat, but more came, bleeding out with every breath. Days passed, and I avoided the flats, keeping their white shimmer always behind me. Yet each morning, I wake with the taste of brine on my tongue, my mouth caked with crystals. Sometimes when I cough, small shards tumble from my throat, cutting as they leave. The wasteland offers no water, yet I feel as if I am drowning in it, drowning in salt that never ends. At night, my dreams carry me back. I walk the glowing walls again, hear the knives scrape along crystal corridors, see the eyes of those preserved beneath the flats, turning slowly toward me. I wake choking, spitting more salt onto the ground. I tell myself I escaped, that the prison lost me, but when I run my tongue across my teeth and feel the sharp grind of crystals forming there, I know the truth. I never left. The salt prison came with me, and it is still building its walls inside my body, one grain at a time. It rose alone from the dust, a jagged spear of rusted steel piercing the sky. The wasteland around it was barren, silent, as though nothing dared draw close. Its base was wider than a fortress, but the structure itself stretched so high that the top vanished into the clouds. I craned my neck until it ached, but still I could not see its end. The tower was endless, its shadow cutting across the land like a scar. The air around it was colder, the wind sharper. The steel groaned faintly, a constant low moan, as though the tower breathed through its own bones. Sections of its skin peeled away in sheets of rust, flaking down like bloodied snow. I thought I saw shapes moving between the girders, shadows slipping along the beams, climbing with ease where no handholds should exist. But when I blinked, there was only emptiness again. I circled its base, searching for purpose, for origin, but there was no sign of builders, no sign of age. It was too ancient to still stand, yet too alive to collapse. The seams glowed faintly, veins of red light threading through the steel, pulsing as though carrying blood instead of heat. A door waited at its base. Small compared to the immensity of the structure, a rusted frame set into the wall. It stood ajar, darkness yawning beyond. The wind pushed faintly against it, coaxing it to creak wider. From within came a hum, low and steady, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I knew I should not step inside. The wasteland is full of traps, monuments to the dead. But the tower's hum was not just a sound, it was a call. And as I stood at its threshold, staring into that endless dark, I realized something terrible. The tower had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was colder still, heavy with the tang of rust. A staircase waited just beyond the threshold, winding upward into darkness. Its iron steps were narrow and slick, edges crumbling with decay, but they held beneath my weight. I began to climb, telling myself I would only go far enough to see what waited above. But the stairs never ended. They spiraled tightly, each turn identical to the last, the walls sweating with condensation that smelled faintly of blood. My footsteps echoed hollow against the metal, a rhythm that seemed to chase itself, as though someone else followed a step behind. I glanced back more than once, but the bottom had vanished into shadow. There was only the stairwell, up and up, no beginning, no end. Hours passed, or maybe days. I lost the measure of time quickly. My water was gone by the third rest, my bottle rattling empty in my pack. My throat ached with dryness, my lips split with each breath, but still I climbed. My legs trembled, muscles knotting with pain, yet they moved without my command. driven by something deeper than will. The tower would not let me stop. Every so often, I thought I saw doors built into the wall, faint outlines of frames sealed shut with rust. When I pressed my hand to one, the metal was warm, vibrating faintly, like a pulse behind skin. I moved on quickly, afraid of what might answer if I lingered. The higher I climbed, the heavier the air grew, as though the tower pressed down from above. My chest rattled with each inhale, but still the stairs rose before me, endless, mocking. My body screamed for rest, for surrender, yet my feet betrayed me, dragging me higher. And with each turn, the hum inside the tower grew louder, crawling into my bones until I feared it would hollow me out completely. The stairwell bent upward in its same endless spiral when I saw the first window. A square cut into the wall, framed with rust and dripping condensation, where no opening should have been. I pressed my face close, expecting to see the desert I had crossed, but the view was not mine. Beyond the glass stretched a wasteland I had never walked, its dunes jagged like teeth, the sky split by lightning with no clouds to berth it. I moved on, shaken, but more windows appeared with every turn. Each one revealed another place, another stretch of ruin. Cracked earth, black oceans, forests of ash, all desolate, all lifeless, or so I thought until I saw them. Strangers, figures standing in those dead lands, staring up at the tower. They did not move, did not speak, but their heads tilted back at the exact angle to meet my eyes through the glass. Their faces blurred by distance, yet I felt their attention cling to me like hooks in flesh. When I stepped closer to one window, they stepped closer too, their forms multiplying in the haze until an entire crowd pressed against the horizon, watching. I stumbled upward, refusing to look, but the windows kept coming, each one revealing more strangers, more wastelands that should not exist. Some figures were ragged like me, others tall and stretched, their proportions wrong, their mouths too wide. But every one of them followed my climb, their eyes unblinking, their silence more suffocating than any scream. The tower groaned with my haste, its hum vibrating the glass until I feared it might shatter and let them through. I pressed onward, heart pounding. But I knew the truth now. The tower did not belong to one world. It pierced them all. And in everyone, something was waiting, watching, hoping I would climb higher. The stairs bent upward again, and I stumbled onto a landing broader than the rest. My knees buckled with exhaustion, and I pressed my hands against the cold steel wall, gasping for air that tasted like rust. I thought I was alone, as I had been since stepping into the tower, but then I heard it. A whisper, dry as sand, brushing against the edge of hearing. "Don't stop." The words came from the shadows, and slowly, shapes emerged. Others, men, women, all gaunt, their cheeks hollow, their lips split and bleeding. Their clothes hung loose, ragged with sweat and time. Each clutched the railing as if it were the only thing tethering them to the world. Their eyes, wide and fever bright, fixed on me with a hunger that was not for food or water, but for belief. That I too would keep climbing, that I would not falter where they dared not fall. I asked them how long they had been here, how far the stairs went. None answered. Their mouths worked soundlessly. Then in unison, they whispered again, "Don't stop." The words cracked with thirst, but carried a weight that pressed into my bones. One staggered closer, her hand trembling as she reached for me. Her fingers left streaks of rust across my arm, as though her skin had already begun to fuse with the tower. She leaned close, her breath sour with decay, and repeated the mantra against my ear. "Don't stop." I wanted to rest, to collapse beside them, But their whispers grew frantic, the air shivering with the force of their desperation. The hum of the tower swelled in answer, louder now, deeper, vibrating the very marrow of my bones. I turned back to the stairwell, my body screaming with pain, but my feet moving anyway. Behind me, their voices rose, not pleading anymore, but commanding. And I understood then. The tower did not allow stopping. Those who lingered too long had not chosen to wait. They had been claimed by the climb itself. I climbed until my legs trembled beneath me, until my throat was nothing but a split husk and my eyes stung with salt. The stairwell never changed, never ended. Step after step, landing after landing, each identical to the last, until I began to wonder if time itself had withered in this place. The hum of the tower was inside me now, syncing with my heartbeat, a rhythm I could no longer separate from my own body. At last, I stopped. I turned, desperate to see how far I had come, to glimpse the base or even a hint of the desert outside. But there was nothing. The stairs behind me had vanished. Only darkness stretched downward, thick and infinite, swallowing every trace of the path I had taken. I was no longer climbing a staircase. I was suspended in the tower's throat. Panic clawed at me. But when I tried to descend, my foot met only emptiness. The stairs dissolved the moment I turned away from the ascent. My breath came shallow, and the hum grew louder, echoing in the steel until it shook my bones. I realized then that I was not walking the tower. The tower was walking me, drawing me deeper, higher, farther, wherever it wished. I pressed my hands to the wall, but the steel rippled like skin, warm and damp beneath my palms. It shivered at my touch, and I felt it pulse, felt it breathe. The tower was alive, and I was inside it. I screamed, but the sound bounced back, swallowed instantly, leaving only the hum. My voice belonged to the tower now. My body did too. I never reached the top, I never will. The endless tower does not end, because it does not lead anywhere. It only consumes, step by step, until nothing is left but the climb. And now, I am part of it. The wasteland offered nothing but dust and silence, until the scrapyard rose before me like a graveyard of giants. Towers of rusted machines leaned into one another, their skeletal frames groaning when the wind pressed too hard. Engines split wide like rib cages, gears spilled across the ground like broken teeth. The air was thick with the sour tang of corroded metal, sharp enough to sting my throat with every breath. Hunger had driven me here. Hunger so fierce my belly felt like it was folding in on itself, biting harder than any beast. I picked my way through the heaps, searching for scraps of food, for water, for anything. Once, this place had been alive with noise and fire. But now it was a grave, and I was scavenging among the bones. The silence was uneasy, stretched too thin, broken only by the occasional clang as a piece of metal slid free and toppled into the dust. As I dug through a collapsed engine, my reflection flickered in the shard of a broken panel. For a heartbeat, it wasn't mine. The face looking back had eyes too bright, gleaming like molten steel. The mouth moved in silence, jaws grinding with a sound that wasn't an echo, but something alive within the metal. I dropped the panel, the image shattering into fragments, but the unease remained. Deeper in the yard, I found shapes I first mistook for statues. Bent low, long-limbed, their spines arched sharp as blades. They were made of steel, patched with furred streaks of rust that clung like mange. At their sides, jagged teeth jutted where gears had fused into jaws. I told myself they were only wreckage, machines warped into strange forms. But then one of the heads twitched, and the hollow sockets of its eyes glowed faint red. Hunger drove me here. But something else was hungry too. Night fell heavy over the yard, the last light sinking beneath the twisted silhouettes of broken cranes and shattered engines. I had hidden myself in the hollow of a rusted tank, curling against the cold steel for shelter. The air was sharp with iron, the silence oppressive. But then the silence cracked. A grinding sound rose from the heaps, slow at first, like stone dragged across stone. I pressed my ear to the wall and felt it too. A vibration running through the carcass of the tank. Then came another sound, closer, sharper. Metal scraping against metal, teeth sharpening themselves in the dark. I peered through a gap in the hull and froze. The statues were moving. The arched shapes I had thought abandoned shifted with purpose, dragging themselves free of the wreckage. Plates of corroded steel fused together, joints groaning until they bent like limbs. Heads lifted, jaws clattering as rows of jagged gear teeth clicked into place. Their eyes burned faint red, brighter now, bleeding into the dark. They gathered in silence, stalking between the heaps, their spines bristling with jagged rods and broken pipes like quills. Oil leaked from their jaws, thick and black, dripping into the dust where it hissed as though burning. One tilted its head back and released a sound not quite a howl. More the shriek of twisted steel under pressure, a cry that rattled the bones of the scrapyard itself. The others answered, their voices grinding in unison, a chorus of metal wolves waking to hunt. I held my breath, my heart hammering in time with their clattering jaws. The tank around me felt too thin, too fragile. They prowled closer, their bodies scraping sparks against the wreckage. I crawled from the tank at first light, but the wolves were waiting. Their glowing eyes hung in the shadows between the heaps, glimmering like coals banked in ash. They didn't rush me. They didn't need to. Every step I took, they mirrored, keeping their distance, pressing me deeper into the labyrinth of twisted steel. Their bodies scraped against the wreckage, sparks hissing where jagged plates caught and tore. I tried to run, darting between towers of rusted beams, but the sound followed. Their claws, long slivers of sharpened scrap, rang as they raked against the ground. The air was filled with a smell of oil, acrid and heavy, clinging to the back of my throat. Then they howled. The sound split the scrapyard, a shriek so sharp it cut the air itself. It was not a call, but a weapon. The heaps shook with the force of it, slabs of steel groaning as they shifted and fell. The noise dug into my skull, splitting thought from thought until there was only pain. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was inside me, vibrating my bones, tearing my resolve apart. The wolves closed in, their red eyes circling like lanterns in the fog. Their bodies were lean, impossibly fast. Each movement a violent jerk of pistons and bone rust. One lunged close enough for me to feel the heat radiating off its chest, to see the oil dripping from its teeth, sizzling where it struck the ground. I staggered back, breath caught in my throat, every exit blocked by steel or glowing eyes. The scrapyard's maze had turned into a trap, each path narrowing toward me. And when they howled again, the sound wasn't just knives on steel. It was my name, torn apart and screamed back in shreds of rust and blood. It came out of the shadows faster than anything that size should move. A blur of rust and jagged steel, its weight slamming me into the wreckage with a force that rattled the beams around us. Its jaws clamped down before I could raise my hand, teeth of shattered gears and sharpened bolts sinking into my arm. The crunch was sickening, metal grinding through bone. I screamed, but the sound was drowned beneath its howl, a shriek that set the whole scrapyard trembling. I tore free, ripping skin and flesh against its teeth. The wolf staggered back, jaws dripping black oil streaked with red. My arm hung useless at my side, shredded, the wound already burning as though acid poured through it. When I pressed my trembling fingers to the flesh, I felt grit beneath the skin, metallic shards, rust spreading like infection. It wasn't blood alone that poured from me. Shards of corroded flakes bubbled out, sharp and gleaming, pushing from my veins as if the bite had seeded me with steel. The pain was unbearable, every heartbeat driving the fragments deeper, until I swore I could hear them grinding inside my bones. The wolves circled tighter, their eyes glowing brighter now, as if they could smell the change in me. Their howls rose again, but this time it wasn't a call to hunt, it was celebration. They knew what was happening. My body convulsed, the wound crawling with heat, and the taste of iron filled my mouth until I choked on it. The rust was inside me now, working its way through muscle and marrow, remaking me from the inside out. I pressed my back to the steel wall, gasping, my vision swimming. The wolves did not rush. They only watched, patient, their jaws clattering in rhythm, because I was no longer prey. I was becoming one of them. I ran. Somehow, despite the pain, despite the jagged fire gnawing its way through my veins, my legs carried me out of the scrapyard's labyrinth. I stumbled over broken axles, tore my skin against twisted steel, but I did not stop until the heaps were nothing but shadows in the distance. The wolves did not follow. They did not need to. My arm throbbed with every step, the bite raw and alive, but worse than the wound was the taste in my mouth. My tongue pressed against my teeth and found them slick with iron, my spit dark, metallic. I coughed, and with the breath came sparks, tiny glowing embers that scattered into the dirt before fading. I collapsed, trembling in the dust, but the change did not relent. My heartbeat rattled like machinery, a clatter of gears grinding into place. My skin crawled with the shifting of flakes, rust blossoming from beneath like a second skeleton forcing its way through. Every inhale pulled the scent of oil deeper into my lungs. Every exhale carried the faint hiss of fire. When I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Their glowing red sockets, their jaws dripping with blackened oil. I heard their howls echoing inside me, vibrating through my ribs, promising that the hunt was not over. I had escaped the den, but I had not escaped them. I pressed my palm to the earth and saw the soil scorch beneath my touch, leaving streaks of black. My chest heaved, and another spark leapt from my lips, brighter this time, lingering longer before fading to smoke. The wind carried the scent back to me, acrid and familiar. I thought I was fleeing for my life. But the wolves had not tried to kill me. They had bitten me open, fed me rust, and remade me. Now, wherever I go, I hear their claws behind me, not chasing, but waiting. And when I breathe, the sparks prove the truth. The rust wolves made me one of their own. The wind cut like knives as I trudged across the white wasteland, the sky a dead gray pressing down. I almost missed it at first, the faint rise of shapes buried beneath drifts of snow and ice. As I drew closer, the outlines sharpened, tense, dozens of them, frozen stiff. Their canvas stiffened into brittle husks. They leaned into one another like broken bones, their poles cracked, their ropes stiff as wire. I brushed the ice from one flap and felt it crumble under my hand, flakes snapping off like old parchment. Inside, the tent was dark, the air colder than the open waste. A lantern sat in the corner, glass clouded with frost, its wick still black as if it had burned not long ago. Beside it were sleeping bags, frozen into stiff shapes, their forms so rigid I thought bodies must still be trapped inside. I kicked at one, half hoping to prove myself wrong, but the canvas cracked, revealing a face within. The skin was blue, lips split wide as if the last breath had frozen halfway out. Ice clung too, his lashes like needles, eyes wide and staring. I stumbled back into the snow, my chest heaving with frozen air. The whole camp was a graveyard, the silence heavier than the drifts that swallowed it. No footprints marked the snow, no signs of struggle, only stillness, as though the cold itself had crawled in and claimed them without sound. Yet as I turned to leave, I felt it then, the faintest vibration under my boots. A hum, low and steady, carrying through the ice. The tents stood still, their frozen shapes sharp against the gray horizon, but I could not shake the feeling that they were watching, that the dead had not left at all, but were waiting, locked in the frost, their silence deeper than any grave. I forced myself deeper into the camp, my breath fogging thick in the air, each exhale turning brittle as it left my lips. The tents stood in rows, their entrances sealed by ice, but I tore at them anyway, needing to see, needing to understand what had happened here. Inside the first, I found 3 figures seated in a circle, their backs rigid, their eyes wide open and filled with frost. Their fingers clutched their own throats, nails digging deep into the flesh, as if they had strangled themselves. I stumbled out, heart hammering, but the horror did not end there. Each tent was the same. Dozens of bodies, men and women frozen mid-scream, their mouths twisted into silent agony. The ice preserved every detail. The torn skin beneath their nails, the veins in their eyes bursting into scarlet threads before the blood had frozen solid. None of them had tried to flee. They had stayed where they were, seated in groups, their faces fixed in a terror that felt more contagious than the cold. The deeper I went, the stronger the air pressed against me. It wasn't just freezing. It felt heavy, thick, as though the very atmosphere had turned solid. My lungs burned, and when I pressed a hand to my chest, it rattled like brittle glass. The dead seemed to lean closer as I passed, their frozen eyes following, accusing, warning. At the center of the camp, I found the largest tent, its canvas stretched high, the ice at its edges glowing faintly blue. I reached for the flap, but my fingers locked before I could touch it, stiff with sudden cold that bit straight into the bone. The silence deepened until I could hear nothing but the blood freezing in my own ears. And in that silence, the thought struck me like a blade. The cold had not killed them. Something inside the frost had. Something that was still waiting, patient, for me to breathe it in. That night, I stayed near the edge of the camp, huddled against the wreck of a tent with my coat pulled tight. The wind had gone still, the silence so deep it pressed against my skull. I thought maybe the cold had stolen all sound, until I heard it, a sharp crack like glass splitting. It came from the ice itself. At first it was only one, then another, spreading across the camp like veins breaking through the frost. The tents shuddered faintly, their frozen fabric creaking, and from beneath the crust of ice came a murmur. Voices, faint at first, muffled by the frost. They were not screams. They were whispers, pleading, rising in trembling waves. Please. Warmth. Let us out. The words trembled in the night, carrying on the fractures that split the ground. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound did not stop. It was in the ice beneath me, traveling up through my bones. Each crack released another chorus, dozens of voices overlapping, some sobbing, some frantic, all desperate. I forced myself to stand, to move toward the edge of the camp. But every step was echoed by the cracking ground. The frozen faces inside the tents shifted. I swear they did, their eyes glinting, their lips quivering, as though trying to form the same words. begging. The blue glow beneath the largest tent brightened, pulsing like a heartbeat. The ice surrounding it groaned, thick plates shifting outward as the voices reached a fever pitch. The sound grew so loud, it felt like it would split me open, the begging twisting into demands. I stumbled into the snow, chest burning. But there was no escaping the sound. The ice wanted me. The dead wanted me. Their voices clawing up through the frost with one unyielding truth. They would not stop until I joined them, frozen forever in their silent chorus. I gathered what little I could find, splintered poles, scraps of canvas stiff with ice, and piled them together with shaking hands. My body was numb, my breath shallow. But I forced the spark, striking steel until the tinder caught. For a moment, relief surged through me as the flames licked upward. Yet something was wrong. The fire did not glow gold or red. It burned an eerie blue, its light crawling across the snow like a stain. The heat should have driven the cold back, but instead the air grew sharper, cutting deeper into my skin. The glow spread across the camp, washing over the tents like moonlight. And then the frozen ones began to move. Their mouths opened, not wide, not in motion, but like cracks in the ice splitting further. From between their blue lips poured mist, thick clouds that rose with a hiss. At first, the mist was silent, drifting on the air like smoke. But then the screaming began. Dozens of voices, ragged and endless, shrieked from the frozen throats, filling the night with a sound so piercing it felt like my skull would burst. I stumbled back from the fire, but the flames bent toward me as if drawn to the sound. The blue tongues stretched, leaning into the snow, feeding on the mist pouring from the corpses. The screaming mist twisted in the light, forming faces that writhed and tore themselves apart, only to form again. The campers did not collapse. Their bodies stayed frozen, mouths gaping wider as the mist poured out without end. The fire devoured their screams, growing taller, more violent, its shadows stretching like claws. The ground beneath me shuddered with the force of their voices, and in the howl of that cursed fire, I realized the frost had never meant to preserve them. It had meant to trap their suffering, feeding it forever to the cold flame. And now it was feeding on me too. I turned from the blue fire and ran, my boots sinking deep into the snow, each step heavier than the last. The camp fell behind me, swallowed by the haze of screaming mist, yet its echoes clung to my ears, rising and falling like a chorus chasing me through the dark. The cold bit harder now, sharper than before, no matter how far I pushed myself. It wasn't the weather, it was inside me. My chest burned, not with heat, but with spreading frost. Each breath came brittle, breaking apart in my lungs as though I were inhaling shards of glass. I coughed, and ice splintered from my mouth, a spray of white crystals falling into the snow. The pain should have made me cry out, but even my voice felt frozen, trapped in the tight cage of my throat. The further I went, the worse it grew. My fingers stiffened, veins crawling blue beneath my skin. My ribs creaked when I inhaled, frost blooming along the edges as if the cold were shaping me from the inside out. I thought of the campers, their wide eyes, their hands locked around their own throats. They hadn't been strangling themselves. They had been trying to hold the cold in, to keep it from escaping, from spreading. The sky above blurred into endless gray, and the snow beneath me no longer crunched. It hummed, alive with the same vibration I'd felt under the tents. The wasteland itself was a lung, and I was only another breath caught within it. I fell to my knees, my chest rattling with ice, my breath fogging in sharp, broken bursts. The cold didn't just cling to me anymore. It had claimed me. With each inhale, I feel myself slipping, my breath no longer my own. Soon, I will not breathe at all. The frost will breathe for me. The day had begun like any other. Dust clinging to my skin, the horizon a pale smear of heat. But then the sun faltered, flickering like a dying flame before it blinked out completely. In its place, the sky darkened to a deep bruise, and from that wound, the red began to fall. At first, it looked like rain, thin lines drifting down from the clouds, but as it struck the ground, I saw the truth. It was thicker, heavier. It spread in dark streaks across the sand, seeping into the earth as if the world itself had been cut open. I lifted a hand, and a droplet landed on my skin. It clung, warm and sticky, sliding slow down my wrist. The metallic tang rose immediately, sharp as rust, filling my nose, my mouth. Blood. The sky was bleeding. I stumbled backward, my boots slipping in the growing pools that spread across the ground. The wasteland's dust turned black mud beneath the weight of the falling red. It soaked into my clothes, heavy, dragging me down with each step. My throat tightened with panic. But the air was saturated now, metallic and hot, every breath tasting of iron. In the distance, the shapes of the landscape blurred. Hills, rocks, all ran together under the constant downpour. I thought I saw figures moving there, silhouettes bending under the rain, but never stumbling, their arms raised as if to drink it in. The red streaks painted their bodies until they glistened like flayed flesh. Yet they did not fall. I wiped my eyes, but it only smeared more across my face. The sky above pulsed, dripping thicker, as though the wound had torn wider. And as I looked up into that endless bleeding dome, I realized something worse than fear. The sky was not weeping. It was feeding, pouring itself into the earth, into us, until nothing remained untouched by its hunger. The earth could not keep up with the sky's bleeding. Every drop sank fast, swallowed whole by the thirsty soil. The dust darkened, clumping into thick black mud that writhed as if alive. I staggered across it, my boots sinking deeper with every step, the ground pulling like a mouth desperate to swallow. Then the shapes began to rise. At first, they were only mounds, shifting under the surface, bubbles of mud swelling upward. But then fingers broke through, long, skeletal, dripping red, as though they had clawed their way out of a slaughterhouse floor. One hand became many, arms stretching, bodies pulling themselves free from the soil's grip. They stood swaying, their skin slick with crimson, eyes milky and unfocused, mouths gaping wide as if still gasping their first breath. Their movements were slow but deliberate, heads tilting toward me, nostrils flaring as if they could scent the warmth left in my body. The rain slicked their forms until the ground beneath them gleamed red, reflecting their shapes in rippling pools. I backed away, heart hammering, but there was no direction left untouched. More bodies rose behind me, all around me, until the wasteland was filled with their staggering silhouettes. Their jaws opened, and a wet, gurgling chorus spilled out, a sound like blood being poured from too many throats at once. The ground trembled with their weight, each step sinking deep into the mud, pulling up ropes of black earth and red water. I thought of the sky bleeding above, the earth drinking below, and realized I was standing in between, caught in a feeding ground. One of them lurched close enough that I felt the spray of crimson against my cheek. The warmth of it clung, seeping in. And in that moment, I understood. They weren't just rising from the soil. They were rising for me. They moved in silence, but for the squelch of mud and the endless patter of the bleeding sky. Their heads tilted back, sockets empty, yet their steps never faltered. They walked as if pulled by invisible strings, guided not by sight, but by the rhythm of the crimson rain. Every drop that struck their faces slid into the hollows where eyes should have been, streaking down until their skin gleamed slick and raw. I tried to step around them, slow and careful, but their hands lifted, rising as one. Fingers long and twisted, skin glistening, they reached toward me with a terrible patience. When the first touched my sleeve, I nearly collapsed from the shock of it. Wet, warm, alive. It was not the clammy cold of the dead, but the heat of flesh soaked through with fresh blood. The contact spread a burning through my arm, as if the crimson dripping from the sky had chosen me too. I tore free, stumbling back, but more arms followed, grasping from every side. They brushed against my face, smeared across my throat, leaving streaks of red that burned like open wounds. Their mouths opened wider as they neared, not to speak but to drink, tongues black and swollen, desperate to lap whatever warmth I still carried. The sky wept harder above, streaks falling in sheets, coating their bodies until the world itself seemed made of blood. I wiped my face, my hands, but it was useless. Every touch left me marked. Every breath filled me with the iron taste of rain. Their hands reached again, higher now, pressing against my chest, my heart. Each touch felt heavier, stronger, as though they weren't just pulling me closer but pulling me down. And as the dripping sky poured faster, I understood the truth. They were not searching for me. They were claiming me, piece by piece, to join their blind procession beneath the bleeding heavens. I broke from their grasp and hurled myself into the ruins of a shattered wall, the stones blackened with age and fire. My body wedged into the hollow beneath, the weight of rubble pressing against my back. For a moment, I thought I had escaped them. The blind figures shuffled past, their heads tilted to the sky, their arms swaying like pendulums as they followed the pull of the crimson rain. Their gurgling chorus drifted away into the storm. But the sky did not spare me. The cracks in the stone wept red, slow at first, then faster, until rivulets streamed down over my hands and face. I pressed my lips shut, but the liquid forced its way in, dripping into my mouth, hot and metallic, coating my tongue. I gagged, but every breath brought more. The hollow became a vessel, filling with the sky's blood, rising higher against my chest, my throat, my chin. I tilted my head back, my lungs screaming, but the rain poured harder, pressing through every gap in the stone, soaking me until I was submerged. My ears filled with the dull rush of liquid, and in it I heard whispers. Thousands of voices layered together, murmuring as one. They weren't pleading, they were welcoming. The warmth became unbearable, not the heat of life, but the fever of rot. I clawed at the stones, my nails breaking, but they held fast, pinning me beneath as the flood climbed. My body convulsed, my chest heaving, and when I finally opened my mouth to breathe, the red surged inside. It scalded my throat, filled my lungs, drowned every thought until there was nothing but the iron taste of eternity. The last thing I saw through the blur was the sky itself pulsing, dripping faster, as though pleased that I had finally let it in. I woke on dry ground, the rubble gone, the pools of red vanished as if they had never been. My chest heaved, each breath sharp and ragged, but my lungs held air instead of blood. The wasteland stretched around me, pale and silent. The sky a dull gray that looked almost merciful after the storm. For a moment, I thought it had ended, that I had survived something no one was meant to see. But the taste lingered, metallic, thick, clinging to the back of my tongue no matter how much I spat into the dust. My clothes were stiff, stained dark as though soaked through, though no rain fell now. I stared upward, half afraid, half hoping. But the sky remained empty, its wound hidden. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. When I closed my eyes, I saw it still, the crimson clouds pulsing, dripping, flooding the earth. I saw the blind ones rising from the soil, their mouths opening wide, their hands pressed against my chest. I felt the blood pouring into my throat, filling me until my body was more liquid than bone. Each night since, the dream returns. The bleeding sky waits for me in the dark, its drops falling slow, patient. I wake with my lips wet, my sheets damp, the metallic taste sharper than ever. Sometimes I cough, and what comes up stains black in the firelight before vanishing like smoke. I know it was no dream. I know the sky only spared me for now. Let me crawl free so I could carry its hunger further. One day, it will open again, and when it does, there will be no waking. The sun will vanish, the heavens will bleed, and the earth will drink until all of us are swallowed. And when that day comes, I will not run, because I have already drowned once, and the sky remembers me.